300 years ago, the will of heaven appeared. Countless secret kingdoms and dungeons descended to Earth. Along with them came numerous powerful demons who proclaimed the apocalypse for humanity. After the initial chaos, the awakened emerged. The Job Changers possessed a powerful power that helped them defeat those monsters and save the world from its near destruction. To fight against the monsters, the Job Changers continued to explore the secret kingdoms in order to obtain wealth and materials. Nations began working hard to cultivate these Job Changers, allowing everyone to awaken at the age of 18. The day came to awaken a class for students turning 18. To awaken a class, one had to touch a magical blue crystal. Several students touched the crystal. One student named Wang Wei from the 3rd year of Class 2 failed to awaken a class and was labeled as a student without a class. Another student named Lai Wei from Class 3 of the year successfully awakened the Swordsman class. Another student named Wang Hao from Class 3 of the 2nd year successfully awakened the Crafter class. The awakenings were usually divided into 3 categories, according to their class: combat, support, and creation. The combat category was the most practical and everyone wanted to obtain it, while on the other hand, no one wanted to obtain the creation category, since in this category were those who couldn't fight and were considered the weakest and despised by everyone. Several more students touched the crystal and a student with purple hair became happy as he awakened the combat category called Magic Swordsman. On the other hand, another student became sad and started crying because he had awakened the creation category. He began to wonder why he had managed to awaken this class that was not good for combat. After the awakening ceremony was completed, the class range was also divided, usually into 4 categories: common, secret, and divine. Among them, a divine rank was the rarest. This rank could only be seen once every 100 years. It was our protagonist's turn, Jiang Chen, to touch the crystal and awaken a class. He touched the crystal and it began emitting a powerful light. Upon seeing this, the other students were astonished. A brown-haired boy pointed his finger at Jiang Chen and told everyone that he was the prodigy of the academy. Another student informed the others that this was a sign of an awakening. While Jiang Chen was touching the crystal, it began to emit a powerful light that started advancing rapidly towards the sky. The students began to wonder what rank this class was. Several thought it could be a divine class, as Jiang City hadn't produced a divine talent in hundreds of years. In a matter of seconds, the crystal started emitting a powerful light that formed a giant tree in the sky, visible from every corner of the city. It was said that every time a divine rank class awakens, a phenomenon occurs that can shake the heavens and the earth. Several seconds later, the awakening of the class was successful, and while Jiang Chen was touching the crystal with one hand, he put his other hand in his pants pocket and simply stared at the sky. At that moment, Director Wang appeared. He approached Jiang Chen and congratulated him for being the pride of the school. Although he knew that Jiang Chen could awaken a combat class, he did not expect him to awaken a divine class. After saying this, Director Wang asked Jiang Chen which class he had awakened. Jiang Chen turned his head slightly towards the director and was somewhat surprised. With a smile, he explained to Director Wang that the class he had awakened was not a combat class. Upon hearing this, Director Wang was shocked. With a surprised look on his face, he started looking at Jiang Chen. Seeing that Jiang hadn't awakened a combat class, he asked him if he had then awakened a support class. Jiang Chen turned his body towards Director Wang, extended his hands to the sides, and plants made of spirits appeared in the palms of his hands. He revealed to everyone that he had awakened the creation class of divine rank called Spiritual Master. He also added that this talent was meant to assist with the growth of plantations and small creatures. Upon hearing this, both the director and others were shocked. With a surprised look, he began to stare at Jiang Chen and explained that this was bad because the creation class did not have combat abilities, so even divine rank was considered useless. The professor accompanying Director Wang asked Jiang Chen not to be discouraged since even if he couldn't fight, at least he could be safe. He explained that spiritual masters were quite popular in the field of research. He also added that the recommendation he had promised was no longer possible. He advised Jiang Chen to enter the research field as a professor could get him a letter of recommendation. Just before the professor could finish speaking, Jiang Chen interrupted him. He turned his head towards him and thanked him with a smile. He put his hands in his jacket pockets and while walking away from the professors, he explained that he had something to do. One of the students started laughing and told his classmate that this was a farce, as he had thought Jiang Chen had obtained some kind of divine combat class, but it turned out to be just a creation class. The other student put his hand near his face and told his friend that life was full of surprises. He also added that everyone thought Jiang the prodigy of the academy, would awaken a combat class, and now no matter how much he excelled academically, he would be considered useless. Jiang Chen put his hands in his pants pockets and began heading towards the exit, while the students nearby started mocking him. One of the students told the others that this was quite enjoyable to watch, as Jiang Chen had been the king of hard work since he entered the academy. Another student told the others that he had worked so hard only to end up getting a creation class. Another student told the others that Lin, the school beauty who always came in second place, had awakened a secret combat class. Upon hearing so many jokes, Jiang Chen simply smiled and thought that just a moment ago, those two students had been very cruel to him. He hadn't expected that awakening up with a creation class would change things so drastically. Thinking about this, he had no doubt that in this world only strength mattered. He began to wonder what was wrong with the creation class, so he reached out his hand and a system window appeared above the palm of his hand. According to the system notification, Jiang Chen had successfully completed his class awakening. He had awakened the class called Divine Rank Spiritual Master, and the conditions for opening the Natural Calamity insect system had also been fulfilled, with the initial Mother of Insects being unlocked. Jiang Chen turned his head to the side, and as he stared at the system window, he couldn't help but smile, thinking that this class was a perfect fit for him. The name of our protagonist was Jiang Chen. After dying, he was reborn in this awakened world. After the Dark Era ended, the whole world became filled with various monsters and dungeons. It was from that day that this world began to respect the strong. He had been reborn as an orphan to survive in this harsh world. Despite having nothing in this world, he gave it his all before turning 18. He thought he was going to have to rely on his own skills to make a living. To his surprise, a month ago, on an ordinary day, a system window appeared in front of him to inform him that the Insect Calamity system would be merged after class awakening, and the system would activate after a successful transfer. Jiang Chen put his hand on his chin, and while looking at the system window, he thought that the insect race, which had once devastated humanity during the Dark Era, was an extremely powerful race. He had heard that the last time a natural calamity occurred, 9 out of the 12 kings of the human race were sacrificed to seal it. He clenched his fist tightly and thought that in this world, strength was everything. There was nothing to doubt. He began to stare fixedly at the system window, and while his body emitted a powerful energy, he thought that as long as he could use the strength of the insect race for himself, the insect race would have no chance against him. Without thinking any further, Jiang Chen activated the system, and by doing so, he was teleported inside the system. He started looking around and became somewhat confused. He began to look ahead. He put his hand near his head to cover his eyes and thought that this was his own sea of consciousness. In front of him there was a great spiritual tree. Upon seeing this, Jiang Chen began to wonder if this was his talent. He had not expected it to be a tree. More system windows appeared. Jiang Chen had several class talents. These talents were evolutions of all things, and sacrifice was required. They could be used once every 10 days and were limited to 1 use per target. The first talent was called Fruits of All Things. Through sacrifice, Jiang Chen could advance the growth progress of fruits, and a special fruit could randomly fall. The second talent was called Improved Growth. This ability allowed him to increase the growth rate of living beings. Currently, this ability increased the growth rate by 10%. By using this ability, Jiang could accelerate the growth of all living beings, and the duration of cooldown was 8 hours. Jiang Chen put his hand on his chin, and while he was looking at the system window, he thought that this system was good since it had even proactively analyzed his talent. Although these talents seemed to lack combat ability, each one could be applied to his system. While he was distracted, a system window appeared asking him if he would like to start summoning the mother insect. Without hesitation, Jiang Chen asked the system to summon the mother insect. At that moment, an evil energy began to emerge from the ground, and a system notification window appeared to inform him that the mother insect was being summoned. As Jiang stared at the energy, he thought that the mother insect had a strong presence. Several seconds later, another system window appeared to inform him that the summoning of the natural calamity rank mother insect called 9 Wings of Miasma had been successfully completed. The mother of the insects was a gigantic creature. She began to stare at Jiang Chen, who took several steps back and was amazed. The status window of the mother of the insects appeared. She was called 9 Miasma Wing. From the abyss she was known as the Sovereign of Death. Once as a calamity, she caused a catastrophe as great as a natural disaster and then disappeared during the Third Era. The current devouring value of her was 0%. Jiang had a 100% affinity with the insect mother. Jiang had to proceed with the devouring and start breeding the next generation of insects to unlock abilities. The insect mother approached Jiang, who was amazed and began wondering why she was so enormous. The insect mother began to stare at Jiang and addressed him as a master. She introduced herself as Little Nine and explained that she was very hungry and wanted to devour fierce beasts. Another system window appeared to inform him that the growth rate of the insect mother had increased by 10%. Now, Jiang could use a sacrificial object to enhance this target. The first enhancement would not consume any sacrificial objects thanks to his talent. Jiang slightly raised his head, and while looking at the system window, he thought that now that he didn't need to use a sacrificial object, there was no time to waste. Without hesitation, he asked the system to upgrade the insect mother. The body of the insect mother began to envelop itself in a powerful green light, and while Jiang was observing this, he thought that she needed to devour in order to level up, so she wasn't going to be easy to please. The body of the insect mother started emitting a powerful aura, and quickly Jiang assumed an offensive stance. Little by little, the insect mother began to evolve and take on the form of a human woman. Several seconds later, the insect mother successfully evolved. Her body began to emit a powerful aura. She had white hair and wore armor. With a murderous look, she started staring at Jiang. Slowly, she began to advance towards Jiang, and a system window appeared above her head. The queen of the new plague had undergone a vital transition and leveled up. Along with leveling up, she gained new abilities. The first ability was called Nurture. With this ability, she could share the experience 10 times with the host. The second ability was called Poisonous Mist. With this ability, she could transform into deadly miasma, corroding everything. The third and final ability was called Communion. This ability allowed her to enhance all of the host's abilities by 20%. Upon seeing the form of the insect mother, Jiang was surprised. The mother insect gained momentum and pounced on Jiang to give him a hug. She explained to him that Little Nine had evolved. Jiang was somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. He turned his head slightly towards her and couldn't help but blush upon seeing that the insect mother had evolved into a human form. She stopped hugging Jiang, and he started stroking her head. She closed her eyes, clenched both fists, and referred to Jiang as a master. With a smile, she explained that Little Nine wanted to devour flesh and blood. While Jiang was stroking her head, a status window appeared above her head. Her name was Nine Miasma Wing, and she had 4 abilities: Poison Mist, Feed, Fury, and United. Currently, her devouring value was 0. Once the devouring value bar was filled up, she could start spawning offspring. She had 2 passive abilities called Experience Return and Attribute Enhancement. While Jiang was stroking Little Nine's head, he started looking at her stat window and thought that the spiritual master talent could accelerate the devouring growth of the insect mother, as well as her experience growth, which in turn would speed up his own improvement. Furthermore, the insect mother was capable of increasing all his attributes by 20%. Jiang's class in this system were a perfect combination. With this, he didn't need a combat class. He extended his hands to the sides, and a bunch of insects started coming out of the palm of his hands. He turned his head towards the insects and was amazed. As long as he killed and devoured quickly, he could soon have an army of insects. Jiang turned his head towards the great spiritual tree and thought about what the system message had just mentioned. Insects, abyss, a catastrophe as big as a natural calamity. Combined with this incomplete information, it was clear that this was not something that could easily be shown to others. Being discovered could lead him to his demise. He put his hands in his pockets, and while he was looking at the spiritual tree, for now he decided to use his class identity as creation, and the poisonous miasma abilities of the insect mother as cover to devour monsters and increase his strength. Hiding was not Jiang's style. He wanted to become strong enough to show off his skills to the world. While he was lost in thought, the sea of consciousness water began to move. Seeing this, the insect mother quickly jumped up and started flying. As they both looked at the water, Jiang explained to her that this could only mean one thing. At that moment, with a murderous look, the insect mother turned her head back and caught Jiang's attention. While she was looking back, she started to smile and explained to Jiang that she felt there was a threat. At that moment, Jiang exited the system space, and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. In front of him there was a man much taller than him. This man had black hair, a beard, and had a scar on his eye. The man approached Jiang and started staring into his eyes, remaining silent for several seconds. The man asked Jiang if the awakening phenomenon that the whole city had seen before had been activated by him. While Jiang was staring at the man, he clenched his teeth tightly and realized that he was at least a master rank or higher. He became alert and started wondering why he was being sought after. While the man was staring intently at Jiang, his body began to emit a powerful green aura. The people around approached, and even though the man was quite far away, they could feel his strong aura. They started wondering what level of awakened he was. Seeing that he was talking to Jiang Cheng, they began to wonder if there was some kind of conflict. The man began to stare into Jiang's eyes, and upon seeing this, he became somewhat nervous as it was quite strange. This man had been pressuring Jiang for a while now without even saying a word, and he didn't know if the man was testing him. At that moment, the insect mother appeared. While she was licking her finger, she approached Jiang and with a murderous look in her eyes towards the man, she told Jiang that this man was a threat to him. To her, the man seemed delicious and she wanted to devour him. Jiang panicked and knew something was wrong. His suspicions were not incorrect as several warning windows from the system appeared. The insect mother had detected a threat to Jiang. The system considered that the man would provide a high value for devouring, and the insect mother was about to start devouring him. Jiang's body began to emit a powerful aura, which started spreading in all directions. He quickly realized something was wrong because now Little Nine had detected a threat, and she was going to start attacking. Jiang's powerful aura reached the students who were previously mocking him. They began covering their faces with their arms and wondering why Jiang had such a cold and sinister aura. Jiang became furious. With a murderous look, he began to stare into the man's eyes. He realized that when the devouring value was low, the aggressiveness of the insect mother increased. To prevent this from happening, he needed to find some monsters for Little Nine to devour as soon as possible. Seeing the powerful aura emanating from Jiang, the man simply started smiling. And upon seeing the man's smile, Jiang quickly realized that he wanted to test his strength, but unintentionally activated the insect mother. The good thing was that Jiang was still able to suppress the insect mother. Without hesitation, Jiang suppressed the insect mother and a system window appeared. He had temporarily suppressed the insect mother and her devouring value was low, so that this would not happen again. Jiang had to start with the devouring and breeding of the insect mother as soon as possible. While the man had his hands in his jacket pockets, he began to stare at Jiang and couldn't help but congratulate him. Although Jiang had just finished his awakening, he was already able to face the man's tests, and even counterattack. The man told Jiang that he was worthy of a divine awakening, and he also added that his future was limitless. Jiang simply stayed silent, listening. He felt relieved as he hadn't been discovered. He approached the man and while staring into his eyes, asked him who he was. The man began to smile, then extended his hand and introduced himself as Jai Gang, the leader of the Night Watch. He admired Jiang's strength and asked if he wanted to join them. Upon hearing this, Jiang was surprised as he did not expect Jai Gang to be part of the Night Watch. The Night Watch was an organization specially tasked by Grand Zia with resisting demons and hordes of beasts. Whenever there was a wave of beasts or a new secret realm or dungeon was generated, the Night Watch would always be the first to investigate or eliminate them directly. Due to the constant fight on the front lines, the mortality rate of the Night's Watch was extraordinarily high, and most people avoided it, but for Jiang it was different. The insect mother needed to continuously devour the flesh and blood of monsters to accumulate devouring value and produce offspring. Currently, Jiang needed an opportunity to confront large monsters, and once the devouring value was complete, the insect mother would start reproducing, and no one knew how much commotion she would cause. For this reason, the wild nature was a good place for breeding the insect mother. As long as Jiang joined the Night Watch, whether by devouring or reproducing, the risks they presented could be easily dealt with. While Jiang was looking at Jai Gang's hand, he couldn't help but smile since the Night Watch organization was perfect for him. The students started saying that the Night Watch had a high mortality rate. Most people didn't even go there, so the students thought that Jiang Cheng wouldn't join the Night Watch. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang forced a smile at Jiang and told him that all the rumors about the Night Watch were a thing of the past. In order to prevent Jiang from rejecting the offer, Jai Gang told him that as long as he was willing to join them, he would receive comprehensive training. Due to his divine rank, his resources were very valuable to the Night Watch. Without thinking twice, Jiang shook hands with Jai Gang and called him leader, telling him that there was no need for further explanation. Jiang began to stare into Jai Gang's eyes and told him that in order to restore the glory of the Night Watch, Their generation should not shy away from their duty. After saying this, he explained to Jai Gang that he was willing to join the Night Watch. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang became somewhat confused. What he didn't know was that Jiang planned on relying on them for the insect breeding. Jai Gang was shocked and asked Jiang if this was true. Just before Jiang could answer his question, the mother insect appeared and started sending system notification windows to Jiang. She was very furious. She explained to Jiang that she was not happy with this because she wanted to eat the man. After saying this, she started telling him that she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, he became nervous, closed his eyes and told Jai Gang that what he was saying was true. After saying this, he left with the excuse of having an important task to do. He began to distance himself from Jai Gang, slightly turned his head towards him, waved goodbye and told him that in 3 days he would be punctually present at the Night Watch headquarters. Jai Gang simply turned his head towards him and remained silent. He may have thought that this was going to be more complicated. He hadn't expected it to be so simple. He had forgotten to ask Jiang what hidden profession he had. At that moment, 2 men fell from the sky and landed near Jai Gang. One of them was the 8th elder of the Martial Arts Academy. Jai Gang turned his head towards them and told the elder that if he was here to snatch people from the Night Watch, then he had arrived too late. The elder asked Jai Gang where the guy who awakened a divine rank creation class was. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang became somewhat confused. He turned his head towards the old man and asked him what he was talking about. The old man approached him and, while looking into his eyes with a surprised expression, asked if he was planning to let a divine ranked awakened from the creation category join the Night Watch just to die. Upon hearing this, Jai Gang realized that Jiang had the divine rank creation class. At the same time, Jiang went to the city. A man named Uncle Wang asked him if he had been the one who caused the phenomenon in the main city. Jiang replied yes. A woman with purple hair approached Uncle Wang. She put her hand on her waist and asked him to lower his voice or he could die if someone looking for trouble came. Uncle Wang put his hand behind his head, closed his eyes, and started laughing. He told her that he was always talking non-stop. Jiang approached them, closed his eyes, and with a smile he reassured Uncle Wang not to worry because this was not something embarrassing. Uncle Wang turned his head towards Jiang and told him that even though the creation category couldn't fight, he had heard that companies always cultivated spiritual plants that needed people from the creation category. He told Jiang that if his parents were here, they would be very proud of him. Throughout the years, Jiang had been able to survive thanks to the support of everyone living in the same building as him. With a smile, he told them all that he wouldn't forget them in the future. Uncle Wang asked him not to worry about these small things. He also added that Jiang had arrived at the right time as they were about to go to a beginner-level secret realm to obtain some equipment. Uncle Wang wanted Jiang to join them and level up together. Jiang accepted the proposal and thanked Uncle Wang. At that moment, a system message appeared because he had completed the team formation. Several minutes later, Jiang and the others crossed the portal and entered the secret realm. While Jiang had his hands in the jacket pockets, he began to look around and started wondering if this really was the interior of the secret realm. At that moment, the torches of the secret realm lit up because the matching had been completed. All the monsters inside started looking towards Jiang and the others. This secret realm called Temple of the Dead was a C rank one, and it was currently open. The secret realm guaranteed a 100% drop rate for items and equipment. Experience points were going to be calculated after completing the secret realm. Voluntarily leaving halfway meant giving up on both experience and equipment. Uncle Wang became somewhat nervous as he realized that these monsters were undead soldiers. He began to wonder why the secret realm system had matched them with a dungeon of this level. Jiang started looking at the undead soldiers and realized that this secret realm was not going to be easy to deal with. The girl with purple hair approached them and explained to Uncle Wang that because Jiang was a divine ranked awakened, the celestial system had assigned them a higher level secret realm. Uncle Wang slightly turned his head towards her and reminded her that Jiang Cheng had awakened in the creation category. The girl with brown hair also approached Uncle Wang, and while looking at the undead soldiers, she asked him why they didn't abandon this secret realm. Just before she could finish speaking, Uncle Wang interrupted her. He began unsheathing his sword and told everyone that there was no problem, as they didn't come across secret realms of this level every day. He also added that this time, thanks to having Jiang with them, they would be lucky and get some great equipment drops. Seeing Uncle Wang unsheath his sword enraged the undead soldiers. Uncle Wang gathered momentum and while advancing towards the monsters, he asked Jiang to step back a bit since these undead soldiers were more dangerous than average C-rank monsters. Uncle Wang asked Jiang to stay behind while they advanced towards the core of the dungeon first. Uncle Wang attacked one of the undead soldiers with his sword, delivering a strong blow to its head. He turned his head back and asked Xiaozai to quickly improve his talent. Upon hearing this, Xiaozai clasped her hands together and activated her power, causing Uncle Wang's talent to improve. Thanks to this enhancement, Uncle Wang ended the life of the undead soldier monster. While Uncle Wang and the others were fighting, Jiang simply stood by watching from afar. He began to wonder if they fought against monsters every day just to survive. When thinking about this, he had no doubt why they always came back covered in wounder, yet Xiaozai had always supported him. He had heard that she became an adventurer because she was forced to heal her brother's eyes. While he was staring at Uncle Wang and the others, he thought about becoming stronger quickly, and when he earned money, properly thanking them. While he was distracted, the insect mother began to manifest herself. She put her hand under her chin, and while looking at the undead soldier's corpse, she told Jiang that there were many monsters and blood here, and she wanted to devour them. While Jiang had his hands in his pants pocket, he turned his body towards the undead soldier's corpse and started smiling. He thought that Little Nine had already detected the corpse. Given this situation, Jiang decided to first test Little Nine's abilities. He reached out his hand to the side and used the level 1 poison barrier skill called Corrosion. A fog of poison appeared in his palm, and he ordered Little Nine to devour the undead soldier's corpse. She thanked him, and the poison fog began to advance towards the corpses and slowly started to devour them. In a matter of seconds, the monster corpses began to disappear. Jiang realized that the monster corpses corroded as soon as they made contact with the poisonous fog. After seeing this, Jiang had no doubt that Little Nine's poisonous fog was very powerful. After Little Nine devoured the corpse, the devouring value rose to 10 points. The level of the monsters was too low, causing the growth rate to be slow, so Little Nine needed to devour more monsters. While Jiang had one hand in his pocket, he slightly turned his head back and thought that Uncle Wang and the other two were truly partners who had been working together for years. In such a short time, they had already advanced to the depths of the dungeon. Since the poisonous mist was an area skill and Jiang still couldn't control it accurately, there could still be accidental injuries. To avoid this, Jiang decided to follow Uncle Wang and the others from behind and take care of the monsters' corpses. At that moment, Little Nine caught his attention. She told Jiang that she felt something. Jiang turned his head to the side and saw more monsters starting to emerge from the ground. Little Nine told him that she sensed freshness and blood in that direction. These monsters were level 10 shadow lurkers. They had a strength of 20 points, agility of 15 points, defense of 10 points, and stamina of 5 points. These monsters were lurking in the shadows to hunt down the weaker stragglers. While Jiang was staring at the shadow lurker monster, he began to wonder if its name was in red because its level was much higher than his. However, in terms of attributes, these monsters were completely inferior to Jiang, who had the skill enhancement united. A statistics window of Jiang appeared. He had a devouring value of level 1. His identity was the Lord of Insects. His occupation was Divine Rank Spiritual Master, and he had 3 level 1 talents called Growth of All Things, Divine Evolution, and Ancestral Tree of All Things. Jiang possessed the insect mother named Little Nine, or better known as Nine Miasma Wing. She had a natural Calamity level. He didn't have any equipment. He had 35 points in Strength, 31 in Agility, 27 in Endurance, and 20 in Constitution. His combat power score was 41 stars. Currently, he had 2 active passive abilities called Experience Return and Attribute Enhancement. The current devouring value was 100 and the current experience was 0. Jiang decided to test his skills. He reached out to one side and gave Little Nine the command to transform into a poisonous mist and follow him. She listened to him and transformed into a poisonous mist, which began to stick to the ground. At that moment, the monsters called Shadow Lurkers started advancing rapidly towards Jiang. He brought his hand close to his face, and while his hand was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he started staring at the monsters. Several seconds later, he began running towards them. Upon seeing this, the monsters tried to attack Jiang, but he dodged their attacks and in the process touched their bodies with his hand, infecting them with the poisonous mist. The monsters began to look towards the body part where Jiang had touched them, and upon seeing poisonous mist, they became confused. While Jiang was staring at the monsters, he extended his hand towards them, then clenched his fist tightly and started smiling. At that moment, Little Nine's poisonous mist grew thicker and slowly began to corrode the bodies of the monsters, gradually destroying them. Jiang simply turned his head towards the monsters and remained silently watching. At that moment, several system windows appeared, and he gained 200 special price. While Jiang was looking at the corpses of the monsters, he thought that they were no match for him. He began to smile as he saw that the devouring value was also increasing rapidly. As he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine appeared and informed him that more blood food had appeared. Behind them, more shadow lurker monsters began to appear. Jiang simply put his hands in his pockets and remained silent without making any movement. Then he turned his head towards the monsters, and while staring at them intently, he felt worried about Uncle Wang and the others as he realized that there were actually many hidden monsters in this dungeon. He decided to quickly finish off these monsters to go check on how Uncle Wang and the others were doing. He asked Little Nine if she would be able to deal with the monsters. Little by little, she began to manifest herself through the poisonous mist. While staring at the monsters, she reached out her hand towards them and asked Jiang to leave them in her hands. As for her, all these monsters were small prey. Several minutes later, Jiang went to where Uncle Wang and the others were. Upon arrival, he saw that Uncle Wang was quite injured. The two of them were surrounded by monsters. Uncle Wang was holding the sword with both hands and had his back against Xiaoyi's back. She had both hands extended towards the monsters and was ready to use her ability to defend herself against the attack. Gradually, the monsters began to advance quickly towards Uncle Wang and Xiaoyi, preparing to attack. While the blood from Uncle Wang's wound was falling onto his face, he clenched his teeth tightly, and while staring at the monsters, he explained to Xiaoyi that each time the monsters were becoming harder to defeat. Therefore, if they continued at this pace, there was no way they could defeat them and come out alive. Uncle Wang turned his head towards her and ordered her to find Jiang and leave here first. Upon hearing this, she turned her head towards him and asked what he was talking about. While he was distracted, an undead soldier gained momentum and started advancing quickly towards Uncle Wang with the intention of attacking him by surprise. While Uncle Wang held the sword with one hand and looked at Xiaoyi, he felt the presence of the undead soldier and began to wonder what was happening. Quickly, he turned his head towards the monster, and upon seeing that its sword was rapidly approaching his head, he clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this was not good. At that moment, Jiang appeared. He reached out towards the monster and used Little Nine's poisonous mist ability. Just before the undead soldier's sword could impact Uncle Wang, the poisonous mist stuck to its body and slowly began to corrode it, destroying it in the process. While little by little the body of the undead soldier was disappearing, Uncle Wang turned around, and upon seeing this, he was surprised and confused at the same time, and began to wonder what was happening. At that moment, Jiang asked Uncle Wang and the others if they were okay. Upon hearing Jiang's voice, Uncle Wang turned his head back, and upon seeing Jiang, he clenched his teeth tightly and remained speechless. As Jiang slowly approached them, he reached out his hand to one side and used Little Nine's poisonous mist, infecting the undead soldiers and destroying them in the process. While little by little all the undead soldiers were being corroded, Uncle Wang turned his body towards Jiang. While holding the sword with one hand, he stared at Jiang and asked him how a creation class awakened like him was able to do this. Jiang stopped in front of Uncle Wang, and while his body emitted a powerful energy, he turned his head towards him and explained with a smile that he had a hidden ability called Poisonous Mist. After saying this, he extended his hand to the side and used Little Nine's Poisonous Mist ability again. Seeing that Uncle Wang was injured, Jiang asked Xiaoyi and Xiaolai to quickly take him to the portal of the secret realm. He also added that he planned to stay behind to cover them. Upon hearing this, everyone was left speechless. With a surprised look, Uncle Wang started to stare at him and told him that even though Jiang possessed a divine class, this was too dangerous. Xiaoyi also began to look at Jiang with a surprised expression and asked him to join them instead of staying here fighting against the undead soldiers. While they were talking, Xiaolai simply put her hand near her mouth and remained silent. Jiang turned his back on them, and as his body emitted a powerful energy, he slightly turned his head towards them and reassured Uncle Wang not to worry because he wouldn't have any problems. After saying this, Jiang turned his back on Uncle Wang and the others, and as his body emitted a powerful energy, he slowly began to approach the monsters. At that moment, the system notified everyone that due to the number of people in the last level of the secret realm meeting the requirements, the boss of the secret realm was being summoned. While Uncle Wang was watching Jiang move away from them and advance towards the monsters, he tried to stop him, but just before he could speak, Xiaoyi interrupted him. She turned her head towards him and reminded him that Jiang was not a reckless person, so she asked him to trust him. After much consideration, Uncle Wang decided to trust Jiang. He threw him the sword and asked him not to forget to return it later. Upon hearing this, Jiang reached out and grabbed the sword, assuring Uncle Wang not to worry as he would return it later. This sword was called the Novice Conqueror's Sword. It had 25 speed points, 30 strength points, and a 2% attack speed bonus. It also had a passive ability that was already active. Jiang brought the sword close to his face and stared aggressively at the monsters. For him, this was great because now he could increase the attack range of the poisonous mist with Uncle Wang's sword. He activated the poisonous mist, causing it to slowly emerge on the blade of his sword. The undead soldiers gained momentum and attempted to attack Jiang, but in the blink of an eye, he evaded their attacks and using Uncle Wang's sword, cut the monsters into pieces, infecting them with the poisonous mist in the process. These monsters were no match for Jiang, as he was the best swordsman in the entire school. While Jiang was distracted fighting against the undead soldiers, a much stronger monster gained momentum and began to advance towards him at high speed. The monster unsheathed its sword, and as it slowly approached Jiang, it prepared to attack him by surprise. Although Jiang didn't initially feel the presence of the attack, once he turned his head to the side, he saw the monster approaching him at great speed. Jiang gathered momentum and made a big leap, dodging the monster's attack and causing its sword to strike the ground. The monster's attack was so strong that it even shattered the ground into pieces. Upon seeing that Jiang had dodged the attack, the monster began to stare at him with a murderous look, then tightly gripped the sword and, upon seeing that he was in the air, attacked again. Luckily, Jiang managed to block the attack in time using Uncle Wang's sword. However, due to the difference in strength, the sword that Uncle Wang had lent him broke in half, causing Jiang to be thrown backwards. Quickly, Jiang stepped on the ground and managed to stop his body in motion. Then he turned his head to the side and, upon seeing that Uncle Wang's sword had broken, he was surprised. This boss was stronger than he had imagined. Jiang was more worried about the sword than the boss, as he didn't know how to explain to Uncle Wang that his sword had broken. The boss of the secret realm was called Undead King and was level 15. The Undead King stood up and, while holding the sword in one hand, started staring at Jiang with a murderous look. At that moment, the body of the Undead King began to vibrate, and in the blink of an eye, it appeared behind Jiang and prepared to attack. Upon realizing the presence of the Undead King, Jiang became terrified and started wondering how the boss had moved at such a high speed. Jiang turned his head towards the Undead King, and while looking at it with an aggressive gaze, he called for Little Nine. Just before the Undead King's sword could strike Jiang, Little Nine appeared and grabbed hold of the blade. She began to stare fixedly at the Undead King and asked Jiang if she could eliminate him. Without hesitation, Jiang replied yes. Upon hearing this, Little Nine became happy and, using only her hand, she broke the blade of the Undead King's sword into pieces. She extended her hands to the sides and her body started emitting a powerful energy that began to move in all directions. Upon seeing this, the Undead King became alert. Now that it had lost his sword, it decided to attack using its fists. Taking advantage of Little Nine's distraction, the Undead King began to advance quickly towards her with the intention of attacking her by surprise. At that moment, Little Nine opened her eyes and her body changed drastically. With a killer look in her eyes, she started staring directly at the Undead King and used the tentacles to defend herself. She adopted an offensive stance and, using her tentacles, she began to attack the Undead King with a series of blows. Her tentacles were as sharp as swords. Little by little, her sharp tentacles started to destroy the body of the Undead King. First, she cut off its left arm and then its right arm, and finally she cut off its head. She impaled the tentacle into the head of the Undead King, then turned around, and the boss's body fell to the ground. She took the head of the Undead King in her hand, and while her body was emitting a powerful energy, she began to approach Jiang. Seeing how powerful she was, Jiang couldn't help but smile. He couldn't believe that Little Nine was so calm in front of a secret realm boss. He thought that now that the boss had been defeated, the portal would open. Little Nine gained momentum and landed near Jiang. At that moment, an energy crystal appeared in front of him. While he stared at the crystal, he started to wonder what it was. The energy crystal began to rise in the sky and slowly started extracting magic from the corpses of the monsters. Upon seeing this, Jiang was amazed. Several seconds later, the energy crystal began to glow, causing a giant monster to appear. This monster was called Undead Tyrant, and it was 20 times bigger than Little Nine and Jiang. With a killer look, the Undead Tyrant began to stare at Jiang and Little Nine. Seeing that the crystal had transformed into a monster, he started to wonder if the energy crystal was the true boss of this secret realm. Jiang turned his head back, clenched his teeth tightly, and ordered Little Nine to destroy the energy crystal inside the Undead Tyrant. While the monster stared at Jiang, it began to roar. The monster struck Little Nine with a mace, but in the blink of an eye, she gained momentum and propelled herself off the wall, dodging the attack. Upon seeing that she had dodged the attack, the Undead Tyrant prepared to attack again. It attacked Little 9 once more, but she gained momentum and made a big leap in the air, evading the attack in the process. This caused the monster's mace to hit the ground, shattering it into pieces. While Little 9 was in midair, with a murderous look on her face, she began to stare intensely at the undead tyrant and then extended her hands towards it, causing sharp tentacles to quickly advance towards it. She began to attack the boss using her sharp tentacles, but effortlessly it dodged all the attacks as if nothing. Seeing that the undead tyrant, being such a large monster, was able to move at such high speed, Jiang was surprised. He clenched his teeth tightly and started thinking of a plan. Looking down at the ground, he saw several plants among the debris. Upon seeing this, he decided to take advantage and use his divine creation class called Spiritual Master. He began to stare at the plants and thought that he only had one chance. Jiang realized that the undead tyrant was too fast and each of its attacks were also powerful. The undead tyrant lifted the mace from the ground and gained momentum. For Jiang, it was like a raging bull that had gone out of control. But this was also a weakness. Little 9 tried to attack the undead tyrant using her sharp tentacles, but it started spinning its body at high speed and dodged them effortlessly. Gaining momentum, it began to quickly advance towards Jiang. Several seconds later, it made a big leap. Jiang lifted his head towards the undead tyrant, and while staring at it intently, he thought that this was not good. He had already sensed it just now. There were many hidden roots beneath the ground. While the undead tyrant was in the air, it grabbed the mace with both hands, and as it quickly advanced towards Jiang, it prepared to attack. As Jiang watched it slowly getting closer, he decided to use his talent at the moment when it got close enough, and this would stop it in its tracks. Several seconds later, once the undead tyrant got close enough, Jiang started staring at it and decided that this was the moment. He reached out his hand towards the ground and a green symbol appeared in it. He used his talent, and gradually the spiritual roots hidden beneath the ground began to emerge. Jiang turned his body towards the undead tyrant, and while giving it a deadly stare, he extended his hand towards it. In a matter of seconds, 4 spiritual roots emerged from the ground and attacked the undead tyrant, piercing through its body in the process, and trapping it in midair, rendering it unable to move. While Jiang had his hand extended towards it, and his body was emitting a powerful aura, he began to look at Little 9 and told her that it was now her turn. In the blink of an eye, Little 9 reached the undead tyrant. She placed a hand on its head, and while preparing her claws with the other, she stared at it with a murderous gaze and responded to Jiang with the understood master. Upon realizing that Little 9 was ready to attack, its expression changed drastically as it realized that something bad was about to happen. It tried to defend itself, but it was in vain. Just before it could make a move, Little 9 gained momentum, and using her sharp claws and tentacles, she attacked it, piercing its body in half and destroying the spiritual roots in the process. In a matter of seconds, the undead tyrant's corpse fell to the ground, while Jiang had his hand extended towards the sky and was controlling the spiritual roots. He began to stare at the undead tyrant's corpse and couldn't help but feel proud. He had managed to defeat the undead tyrant. Jiang's ability was secure enough, so as long as he used his skills properly, he could still play a great role in battles. While he was lost in his thoughts, a system notification appeared to inform him that the growth acceleration was on cooldown for 8 hours. Because of this, slowly but surely, the spiritual roots began to disappear. Several seconds later, the core emerged from the undead tyrant's corpse. Upon seeing this, Jiang decided to break it immediately. Just before the core could fly away, Jiang approached and grabbed it with his hand. He then clenched his fist tightly, shattering the core into pieces. As the fragments of the core gradually fell to the ground, Jiang started staring at his fist with an aggressive look and thought that this was the end. At that moment, several system notifications appeared, congratulating Jiang for clearing the C-rank secret realm called the Temple of the Undead. The system began calculating the contribution and a few seconds later, successfully generated the secret realm score. Jiang Chen, who was level 0 and had the class of Spiritual Master, obtained an S rating in this secret realm. Wang Yi, who was level 12 and had the class of Swordsman, obtained a B rating. Liu Ying, who was level 11 and had the class of Warlock, obtained an A rating. And Yi Qian, who was level 10 and had the class of Boxer, obtained a B rating. The heavenly system began generating team rewards, causing a window to appear in front of Jiang. Several seconds later, the system successfully generated the team rewards, making the window longer. Jiang could choose from several weapons. The first one was a dagger, the second one was a scepter, the third one was a heavy axe, the fourth one was a light axe, and the fifth one was a hammer. As the spiritual roots slowly returned to the ground, Jiang started staring at the system window, and remained lost in thought for several seconds. He put his hand into the system window and grabbed the dagger. Once he took the dagger out of the system, its statistics appeared. This was Edmu's Swift Dagger, ranked D, granting 50 attack points to the user and a 5% speed bonus. This dagger was related to swords and granted 2 professional attributes. Jiang held the dagger with one hand while checking the blade with the other. He thought it was good and decided to use it as compensation for Uncle Wang. He turned his head to one side, and while looking at the system window, he thought there was a lot of equipment. It didn't take him long to realize that all of the equipment was geared towards combat. He wasn't sure if there was anything suitable for the creation classes. He approached the system window, put his hand inside the system, and decided to take a look at the attributes of each equipment. He grabbed the hammer from the system window, and once he pulled it out, the hammer hit the ground because it was very heavy. This hammer was called Call of the King, granting 100 strength points to the user and deducting 100 agility points due to its weight. The attribute of this weapon was that the user had a 10% chance to trigger 5 times more critical damage. While Jiang was trying to lift the hammer from the ground, he began to feel a new sensation. A notification window appeared to inform him that the experience was being rewarded. Upon seeing this, he quickly realized that the system was giving him the experience points he had obtained from this secret realm. Although the hammer was very heavy, thanks to the experience, Jiang gradually became able to lift it. In a matter of seconds, he was able to lift the hammer as if it were nothing. Another notification of the system appeared to inform him that the United ability was in effect. Now all of Jiang's attributes had increased by 20%. While his body was surrounded by a powerful energy, and with one hand he was lifting the hammer, he put the other hand in his pants pocket and turned his head towards the hammer. Under the passive ability of the Insect Mother, he had reached level 6. In this way, the effect of United was also more prominent. He also realized that the physical combat ability increased along with the level. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine approached him. She grabbed his shirt and got his attention. Upon hearing her voice, Jiang snapped out of his trance. She turned her head towards him, and while pointing at the system window with her finger, she asked if she could eat all this as a reward. He put the hammer on the ground, turned his head towards her, and while looking into her eyes, he pondered for several seconds. He turned his head towards her and told her that Little Nine couldn't eat the equipment, as it was for Uncle Wang and the others to exchange for money. He also added that if Little Nine ate it, then she would have a stomachache. Upon hearing this, she placed one hand behind her back, and while touching her lips with the other, she began to look at Jiang with a sad expression. Then, she turned her body towards the undead tyrant's corpse and asked Jiang if she could devour it. He had completely forgotten about the remains of the boss. The devouring value was precious and could not be lost. While his body was surrounded by a powerful aura, he turned his head towards the corpse of the undead tyrant and gave Little Nine permission to devour it since it belonged to her. Without hesitation for a second, Little Nine approached the corpse of the undead tyrant, which was gigantic. While Jiang was looking at its corpse, he began to wonder if this boss wasn't a bit too big. Due to its large size, if Little Nine used the poisonous mist to corrode it, then it might take her some time. Little Nine extended her hands to the sides, closed her eyes, opened her mouth, and told Jiang that she was digging. At that moment, her body started vibrating, and in a matter of seconds she returned to her natural form. After returning to her natural form, she began to look at the corpse with a murderous gaze, opened her mouth, and started approaching it. Despite the fact that the undead tyrant's corpse was gigantic, compared to the mother insect's natural form, it was minuscule. Seeing that she had returned to her natural form to devour the corpse, Jiang was terrified. She opened her mouth, and while rapidly advancing towards the boss corpse, she began roaring. She began to devour the corpse, creating a strong gust of wind in the process. Jiang took advantage of this and removed all the equipment from the system window. While holding the hammer with one hand, he started covering his face with the other. Little Nine's roar was too loud, but luckily they were in the secret realm. If this had happened in the main city, they would have been discovered no matter how well they tried to hide. Once she finished devouring the corpse, a system notification appeared and granted Jiang 400 devouring points. While Jiang was covering his face with his arm, he realized that the devouring value was increasing rapidly. He thought that, as expected, the value of the boss's meat was different. He realized that they needed to eat more boss-type monsters to increase the devouring value. While he was lost in his thoughts, someone started approaching them. Upon hearing the sounds of footsteps, he quickly turned his head back and clenched his teeth tightly as he realized that Uncle Wang and the others were coming because they had heard the noise Little Nine had made. The current devouring value was 8876 points. He approached Little Nine and asked her to quickly return to the other form. Upon hearing his order, she started smiling and replied with a "understood, master." For Jiang, this was a pity as the devouring value was so close to being filled. Several seconds later, Uncle Wang and the others arrived. Upon seeing the equipment on the floor, he realized that Jiang had indeed passed the level. Jiang explained to Uncle Wang that he had broken his sword, but in exchange, he gave him the dagger. Without hesitation, Uncle Wang took the dagger, and upon seeing that it was a rare item, he told Jiang that he would not pursue the matter of Jiang damaging his equipment. Xiao Zai approached Jiang and explained that this necklace was also a rare item which could be sold for a lot of money. Yi Qiang asked him how the hell he had defeated the boss alone. Jiang put his hand behind his head and replied that his poison seemed to be more effective in suppressing monsters like this boss. After saying this, with a serious look, Jiang began to look down at the ground. The secret realm had been perfectly cleared, but after a secret realm was cleared, it would not refresh again. Getting the devouring value from another boss should be enough to start breeding the swarm of insects. If Jiang wanted to find a new boss, then he had no choice but to go to the desert. Uncle Wang started looking at Jiang and told him that it was a shame he was going to the research department. Seeing that he wasn't even level 1 yet could already defeat a boss monster, he told him that in the future, if Jiang leveled up, then he would be strong. After saying this, he asked him what his plans were now. Jiang turned his head towards him and with a smile explained that he hadn't told him before because he was afraid of worrying him. But actually, he was preparing to join the Night's Watch. Upon hearing this, Uncle Wang was shocked and asked if he really intended to join the Night Watch. Jiang placed his hand on top of his head and answered yes. He revealed to them that he was going to go to the Night Watch in 3 days. Before going, he wanted to increase his level, so he planned on heading towards the wilderness soon to continue leveling up. Upon hearing this, Uncle Wang was shocked, and Yi Qiang put her hand over her mouth as she couldn't believe that Jiang was going to do something so dangerous. Xiao Zai reached out her hand towards him and while looking into his eyes with a serious expression, she explained that the wilderness was very dangerous. Just before she could finish speaking, Jiang interrupted her. He clenched his fist tightly, causing Little Nine's poisonous mist to start emerging in the palm of his hand. He asked Xiao Zai not to worry about him, as he knew what to do. He asked them instead of worrying about him, to worry about those monsters. That same day, a few hours later, Jiang boarded the train and arrived on the outskirts of the city. The conductor asked those who were going into wilderness to get off the train. Jiang got off the train. He was wearing a cloak to avoid drawing attention. He started looking to one side and stood still for several seconds. In front of him there was a bridge which was full of awakeners. After awakening the system, Jiang's appetite had increased. What was even more scandalous is that despite not being very stable, there was actually a slight increase in his devouring value when eating. He took out a loaf of bread and while he was eating it, his devouring value increased by 2 points. Little Nine manifested herself, put her hand near her mouth, and while she looked at the bread with an unpleasant expression, she told Jiang that his food wasn't tasty. Upon hearing this, Jiang decided to find something to eat for Little Nine, so he reached out his hand and made a map appear. He opened the map and started looking at it with Little Nine. He didn't expect Uncle Wang to give him most of the equipment. Not only did he give him the map, but he also gave him an important storage ring and a map after knowing that he was going to the desert. These things were really helpful for Jiang. He began walking across the bridge. According to Uncle Wang, the wilderness was influenced by the power of Heavenly Way, and all electronic devices would be disrupted. It was almost like an apocalyptic scenario where monsters constantly migrated to their nests. These maps had an extremely short usage time. Without the latest intelligence, it was difficult to find groups of monsters, let alone the bosses. Firebird and Thunder Rhinoceros were the most common ones and were easy to spot when they moved. It was said that this place marked with a question mark should be avoided as it was a very dangerous nest with higher risk. According to Uncle Wang, this goblin dungeon was the most suitable for him since it had a low level, enough monsters, and fewer people. While Jiang was looking at the map, he clenched his fist and with a smile decided to go, since with a map in hand, he would be able to find it quickly. While he was lost in his thoughts, someone caught his attention and ordered him to stop. Upon hearing this, Jiang became alert and turned his head back to see who it was. A man wearing a cloak placed his hand on Jiang's shoulder, then he stared at Jiang aggressively. He had been calling for him all this time, so he asked why he pretended not to hear him. He just wanted to ask him something. He asked Jiang if he had seen a girl with golden hair around here. Jiang turned his head towards him and with a murderous look replied that he hadn't and also advised him to watch his mouth. At that moment, the poisonous mist from Little Nine started emanating from his shoulder and stuck to the man's hand. He quickly moved his hand away from Jiang's shoulder and became somewhat confused. While he was looking at his hand, he clenched his teeth tightly and began to wonder if this was poison. He didn't know how this could be possible since Jiang didn't seem to have reached level 10 yet. However, Jiang couldn't harm him as the man was a level 27 main defense warrior. Jiang turned his back and as he walked away, advised him to hurry up and find a healer since his poison must be difficult to cure. He also advised him to take care of his brain. After saying this, he bid farewell to the man. Upon hearing this, the man couldn't help but get angry. He called Jiang's attention and asked if he had given him permission to leave. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head towards him and began to look at him with a murderous gaze. The man approached Jiang, and while his body was emitting a powerful aura, he stared at him with a killer look and asked how dare he lay a hand on the Xiao family. Upon hearing this, Jiang began to wonder if he was referring to the Xiao family in the Battle of Heaven. Upon hearing the man's words, Jiang began to stare into his eyes and soon realized what was about to happen. His suspicions were correct. The man attempted to strike him with all his strength, but to his misfortune, Jiang had already anticipated it. He simply gathered momentum and leaped to the side, evading the attack, causing the man's fist to impact against the ground, shattering it into pieces. While Jiang was in the air and moving away from the man, he put his hand in front of his face and with an aggressive look, began to stare at the man and wonder what the Xiao family was. Seeing the man's attitude, Jiang realized that he wasn't normal. The man was very angry. He clenched his teeth tightly and while staring at Jiang with a murderous look, he began to approach him at high speed. He unsheathed his sword and couldn't help but praise him for being quite fast. Upon seeing that things had reached this point, Jiang removed his hood and extended his hand to the side, causing Little Nine's poisonous mist to appear. He began staring at the man intently and told Little Nine that it was no longer necessary to hold back. Upon hearing this, she manifested herself through the poisonous mist and while staring at the man with a murderous look, responded with an understood. Upon seeing the poisonous mist, the man became even more aggressive. He started shouting and asking Jiang if he really believed he would scare him again with the same trick. Just before Jiang could teach this bastard a good lesson, someone appeared and addressed the man as Zheng Tai, reminding him once again that they had to act discreetly. Upon hearing the voice, Zheng Tai's expression changed drastically. He clenched his teeth tightly and as he slowly turned his head back, he couldn't help but feel afraid. Jiang simply stood silently observing and began to wonder what was happening. A man with blue hair wearing a hood appeared behind Zheng Tai. He was quite angry. He started staring at him with a murderous look and asked him what he was doing here. When he had asked him to search for someone, Zheng Tai was scared shitless. He clenched his teeth tightly, and as he slowly turned his head back, he began to tremble and tried to give an explanation. But just before he could speak, the man interrupted him, turned around, slightly turned his head towards him, and with a disappointing look called him trash that only caused problems. Upon hearing this, poor Zheng Tai became even more scared shitless, and just before he could utter a word, the man delivered a strong punch under his chin, causing him to start bleeding from his nose. This man was part of the Xiao family. While his body emitted a powerful energy, he turned his head towards Zheng Tai and with a murderous look reminded him once again that he was nothing but a dog of the Xiao family who had no right to use the name of the Xiao family. Immediately, Zheng Tai fell to his knees on the ground, bowed his head before him, and apologized, explaining that he would not forget it in the future. Now that there was going to be no action, Jiang put his hood back on, turned his head towards them, and silently observed them. Incredibly, he had not sensed the presence of the man. It didn't take long for him to realize that this guy was more dangerous than the previous warrior. While Zheng Tai was getting up, the man began to approach Jiang and apologized, explaining that his dog tended to bite things. He was willing to compensate the protagonist for this. Jiang simply asked him not to worry as it wasn't necessary. Upon hearing this, the man approached him and with a smile asked if he was going to go to the desert. The man approached him and while his body was emanating a powerful energy, he began to stare into his eyes and asked if he wanted to go to the desert together. Jiang simply started staring into his eyes and remained silent for several seconds. Then he turned his back on them and as he slowly distanced himself from them, he refused to go with him as he preferred to go alone. Upon hearing this, the man simply watched as Jiang walked away and remained silent. He thought that he was quite an interesting person. He knew that Jiang had awakened the divine class of creation called Spiritual Master. Once Jiang had distanced himself enough from them, Zheng Tai stood up, approached the man, and asked him if he should continue searching for the person he had been entrusted with. The man slightly turned his head towards him and while looking into his eyes, He replied that no, because by the time he finished, it would already be too late. Besides, he had already found the clues. The girl they were looking for had escaped from the city and probably wanted to cross the desert to reach the nearest station. He took off his hood using his hand, and as he was moving away from Zhang Tai, he asked him not to allow her to arrive alive at the inn, giving him the order to call back all scattered servants and come with him to the desert. Zhang Tai placed both hands on his chest, lowered his head, closed his eyes, and responded with a understood. Humans had spread widely across this planet and had built countless cities. However, with the arrival of the awakened era, waves of beasts, secret realms, and dungeons invading human homes led to the constant remodeling of ancient human dwellings with great power. Nowadays, only the awakened ones who sought power would return to these places to fight against monsters, level up, and obtain wealth. Now these places are known as wild lands. Jiang began to advance through the area, and along the way he came across a bunch of rats. Several hours later, Jiang arrived at a remote and destroyed part of the city. While he was walking, he started to feel as if he had gotten lost. He was heading towards the goblin beast's nest, and he had been walking for several hours already. It was already nighttime and he still hadn't arrived. Little Nine was hungry, so she hunted a rat, climbed onto Jiang's head, and while holding it in her mouth, she realized that it didn't taste good. She came to the conclusion that she couldn't eat just anything. Along the way, Jiang had seen many monsters, but now that he had reached this area, he couldn't even spot a strong monster. These monsters granted a very low devouring value if Jiang didn't find a beast boss nest, considering the time it would take him to return. He couldn't waste much time as it could delay his entry into the night watch. While Jiang was walking, he began to look ahead with a serious gaze and became lost in his thoughts. Just then, the sky started filling up with dark clouds until several seconds later, it started raining. At that moment, a giant spider lurking in the area noticed Jiang's presence, and as it slowly descended towards him, it began to stare at him with a murderous gaze. Jiang reached out his hand to the side, and as raindrops fell onto his hand, he realized that this rain was a magical fluctuation, which meant he had entered an area where some beast lairs were located. He couldn't help but feel joy because even though they had made a mistake in searching for the beast's nest, luckily they had found it. Now the only thing left was to quickly find the monster in order to completely fill the devouring bar for the first time. Several seconds later, Jiang turned his head back and saw the monster slowly approaching him. Both started to stare into each other's eyes and remained silent for several seconds. Little Nine manifested, and while she was staring intently at the monster, she asked Jiang if he wanted her to intervene. Jiang slightly raised his head, and while looking at the monster, he replied to her that it was not necessary since the level of this monster was not high and it only seemed to have a slightly larger body size than the other monsters. Taking advantage of this, the monster descended to the ground and began preparing its sharp legs to attack him. With a killer look, the monster began to attack Jiang using its sharp legs, but without much effort. He gained momentum and started dodging the attacks with small jumps as if nothing. Then, taking advantage of the moment, he gathered strength and took a big leap. In the blink of an eye, he appeared on top of the monster, clenched his fist tightly, and prepared to strike. The monster lifted its head and, upon seeing Jiang, became terrified and started wondering what was happening. Jiang struck the monster forcefully, causing its body to hit the ground, ending its life and destroying the floor into pieces. While Jiang was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine appeared. She placed her hand on her forehead and informed him that more monsters had appeared. Upon hearing her voice, he snapped out of his trance, turned his head to the side, and was surprised. The sound of his strike had caught the attention of all the other monsters hiding in the area. While Jiang was standing on top of the monster's corpse, the giant spiders began to approach him. Upon seeing this, he reached out his hand to the side and used the poisonous mist, summoning the dagger he had obtained earlier in the secret realm. While he and Little Nine were staring at the giant spiders, he told her that it was time to enjoy a good meal. Both of them started staring at the giant spiders with a killer look, and he asked her if she was ready, to which she responded without hesitation that she was. Jiang activated Little Nine's poisonous mist, gained momentum, and in the blink of an eye, attacked the spiders using his dagger, cutting their bodies into pieces and infecting them with the poisonous mist in the process. As they advanced, their levels also increased rapidly. If they kept fighting monsters on the way back, they could at least level up 2 more times. In a matter of seconds, the monsters began to die. Those who had not received a mortal wound died due to the poisonous mist, which started corroding their bodies. In the blink of an eye, all the monsters died, forming a pile of corpses. Jiang approached and asked Little Nine to devour the remains of all these monsters. She became quite happy, extended her hands to the sides, and thanked him. At that moment, she started looking to one side and informed him that something big, powerful, and delicious was approaching. Upon hearing this, he also turned his head to the side, and upon seeing that little Nine was quite excited. It didn't take him long to realize that what was approaching was the boss. Jiang turned his head in the direction from which the boss was approaching, extended his hand, and with a murderous look, used the poisonous mist and gave little Nine the order to attack. The boss began to approach them, and its shadow started becoming visible through the fog. Upon seeing this, little Nine did not disobey the order and attacked the boss. Several seconds later, it began screaming in pain. Upon seeing that the boss had a woman's voice, Jiang turned his head towards it and became somewhat confused. It turns out that little Nine had made a mistake, as the one approaching them was a woman and not the boss. Due to Jiang's attack, part of the woman's clothing ripped, and within seconds she fell backwards onto the ground unconscious. As he stood there observing her, he began to wonder what kind of magical creature this was. Several seconds later, the woman regained consciousness, opened her eyes, and while looking at the sky with a surprised expression, she began to wonder where she was and what was happening. She started to sit up with the help of one hand, placed the other on her head, and as she gradually regained consciousness, she began to wonder what kind of place this was. She remembered not having come here, while she had her hand on her head, and slowly was trying to understand the situation. Jiang approached her, sat down next to her, rested his elbows on his knees, closed his eyes, and with a pleasant smile, asked if she was awake. Upon hearing Jiang's voice, she became alert and began to wonder who he was. Without wasting a second, she stood up and hopped away from him. She adopted an offensive stance, and while looking at Jiang, she asked him who he was and also requested that he not approach her. He stood up, turned his body towards her, and with a calm voice, he asked her not to worry since he was just a job changer who had come to the desert to fight monsters. He also added that he hadn't come to harm her. Upon looking more closely, she remembered who Jiang was. She placed a hand on her chest, began pointing at Jiang with the other, and while staring at him intently, she told him that she knew he was the one who had attacked her before. Upon hearing this, Jiang became somewhat nervous, closed his eyes, and with a smile apologized to her, explaining that he had mistaken her for a monster. Upon seeing that Jiang was quite attractive, she couldn't help but blush. She turned her head towards him and asked how anyone could say that beautiful girls like her resembled monsters. She couldn't help but call him presumptuous. She entered into panic. Quickly she started touching her head and face to see if her nose and ears were still where they should be. Jiang simply stayed silently observing her. He had used all his strength when he attacked her. Now, seeing that she still had so much vitality, and was as if nothing happened, he began to wonder who she was and how she could withstand his attack. Several seconds later, after checking that she had no injuries, she calmed down. Then, she reached out to the side and the golden ring on her finger began to shine and emit a green energy. This ring was like a kind of clock which started projecting the time. Upon seeing the time, she realized that she had wasted too much time. She turned her back on Jiang and while walking away from him, decided to leave quickly before they caught her. While she was slowly moving away, Jiang simply remained silent. He began to stare at her intently and started wondering why she was running away and who were the people chasing her. The woman moved away from him a little, but suddenly stopped abruptly. She put her hand on her mouth and started biting her nails. Jiang didn't take long to realize that something was wrong. He approached the woman and seeing that she was very nervous, asked if there was any problem. As terror started to take hold of her, she slightly turned her head back, closed her eyes, and forced a smile at him. She replied that there were some monsters ahead and since she wasn't very good at fighting, she decided to retreat and let Jiang deal with the monsters. In a matter of seconds, she stopped being nervous, turned her back to him again, waved goodbye and told him that this was it and decided to leave. Upon seeing this, Jiang's expression changed drastically. With a confused look, he started looking at the woman and thought that her acting skills were truly a pity. At that moment, it started to rain and the woman left. Jiang began walking around the area and thought that if there were monsters ahead, it was good because this was exactly what he wanted since these monsters were not opponents for him. Although they gave him devouring points, there was a problem. Jiang slightly turned his head to one side and with a serious look, he thought that dealing with other job changers was going to be difficult. The desert had always been a lawless place where many people dedicated themselves to killing and stealing goods. He began to question whether it was a good idea to capture the woman from before and ask her again. While Jiang was lost in his thoughts, little Nine appeared. She started pointing ahead with her finger, and with a serious look she informed him that there were many monsters approaching from that side. Far from being scared or running away, Jiang was happy. He turned his head slightly towards her, and upon hearing that there were many monsters, he told her that this was great. His happiness didn't last long. He turned his head to the side, and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. In front of him, hundreds of giant spiders appeared, just like the ones he had just defeated. Among them was one even bigger than the rest, which started to look at him with a murderous gaze. As Jiang's body was surrounded by powerful energy, he began to look at the spiders and thought that this wasn't good for him. Fighting against some of them wouldn't be a problem, but now that there were so many spiders, he wouldn't be able to confront them. While little by little the giant spiders were getting closer to him. With a serious look, he began to stare at them fixedly and thought that the woman was not lying. Despite being surrounded by monsters, he felt relieved. He preferred to fight against these monsters rather than against the job changers. The giant spiders became enraged, and with a murderous look, they gained momentum and began to advance quickly towards him. Upon seeing this, Jiang couldn't help but feel happy, as he had no reason not to want the devouring value that was approaching him. Jiang unsheathed the two daggers, and as his body emitted a powerful and suffocating energy, he began to stare fixedly at the monsters, giving Little Nine the command to activate the poisonous mist. She did not disobey the order and responded with a understood. At that moment, her poisonous mist began to emerge from the daggers he was holding. In the blink of an eye, the giant spiders approached him, opened their mouths, and prepared to attack. While Jiang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he stood still for several seconds. One of the giant spiders tried to attack him, but Jiang moved at an incredible speed, and using the daggers and Little Nine's poisonous mist, he gained momentum and in the blink of an eye, pierced its body, splitting it in half and infecting it with the poisonous mist in the process. While he was in the air, he slightly turned his head back, and while staring fiercely at the monsters with a killer look, he thought this was strange because he didn't know why these monsters had become much faster than before. While Jiang was distracted, another giant spider gained momentum and began to advance towards him at a high speed. As it slowly approached him, it started staring at him with a murderous look and prepared to attack. Jiang didn't take long to feel the presence of the giant spider. Quickly, he slightly turned his head back, and upon seeing that it was trying to attack by surprise, he was somewhat surprised. But for the giant spider's bad luck, Jiang was not going to stand idly by. Just before it could make a move, in the blink of an eye, Jiang cut its body into pieces using the daggers. The pieces of its body fell to the ground, and several seconds later Jiang landed on the ground. While he was holding the two daggers with both hands, and his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine. With a murderous look, he began to stare at its corpse and realized that this wasn't right. Although he had reacted in time to the attack, and had ended its life in the blink of an eye, he had received a small cut on his abdomen in the process. At that moment, the small spiders began to advance rapidly towards him, and he didn't take long to realize that these monsters were actually cooperating with each other. Upon closer inspection, Jiang saw a spider that was very different from the rest. This spider had 6 eyes and was much larger, so he quickly came to the conclusion that this spider was the boss. Upon seeing this, he began to question whether this boss was commanding the others. In the blink of an eye, thousands of spiders appeared and surrounded Jiang. While his body was releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist, he started staring at the boss, and instead of running away, he simply stood still. Jiang finally understood that the thousands of monsters living in this area had the same strategy, both in numbers and tactics. So it was not surprising that no one came here. With a serious look, Jiang began to stare at the boss and thought that the only way to defeat these small monsters was by killing the boss. Upon seeing the number of monsters present, he thought this was going to be a bit difficult. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine emerged through the poisonous mist and placed her hand on his shoulder, getting his attention. As she slowly manifested herself, with a serious look on her face, she began to stare directly at the boss and explained to Jiang that she was able to understand the situation. She revealed that these monsters were trying to challenge their master. Upon hearing this, Jiang became somewhat confused. He turned his head slightly towards her and asked what she was talking about. Little Nine thought that these monsters were really arrogant. She extended her hands to the sides, started looking up at the sky, opened her mouth, and let out a loud roar. Upon hearing Little Nine's roar, the spiders finally realized that she was the insect mother, and without a second thought, all the little spiders began to flee. Seeing the spiders fleeing in disarray, Jiang was somewhat surprised and started wondering if the reason could be that these monsters were also insects. Little Nine approached Jiang, slightly turned her head towards him, and informed him that she had severed the connection between the boss and the little spiders. Jiang did not expect that Little Nine's skills could be used in this way. Now that the monsters were disoriented, it was going to be much easier for him to defeat them. He extended the 2 daggers to the sides, and while staring at the boss with a murderous look, he praised Little Nine for doing a good job and decided that it was time to finish off the boss once and for all. Upon hearing this, Little Nine began to return to her original form. She started staring at the boss with a murderous look and replied with a "Understood, Master." While Jiang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and ordered her to follow closely. In the blink of an eye, using his daggers, he ended the lives of several monsters, cutting their bodies into pieces. He no longer had to worry about anything since without the boss's control, these monsters were in disarray. Jiang began to move at a high speed towards the monsters, and using his daggers, he started cutting their bodies into pieces. Now that the monsters were scattered and disorganized, they no longer posed a threat to him, so he didn't need to waste any more time. In a matter of seconds, Jiang finished off several monsters. Then, he gathered momentum, took a big leap, and as he was advancing quickly towards the boss, he thought that now there was only one objective left. The boss opened its mouth, and with a murderous look, it began to stare at Jiang and roar. Jiang decided not to back down and return the gaze. He prepared himself to attack and thought that the boss was the one who could provide the highest devouring value. The boss tried to defend itself, but it was in vain. Just before it could make a move, Jiang descended upon it and swiftly attacked its head with both daggers, infecting it with Little Nine's poisonous mist in the process. Despite the difference in size, within seconds, it lost its life and fell to the ground. Jiang landed on top of the boss's corpse. As he held both daggers in his hands, his body began to emit the venomous mist of Little Nine. He stared fixedly at its lifeless body and decided that it was time to breed the swarm of insects. Jiang approached the boss's corpse, started staring at it intently. He couldn't believe that he had finally defeated it. At that moment, a system window appeared to congratulate him for leveling up. Now he was level 14, had a power evaluation of 127 stars, and the passive abilities and level up effects were still in effect. Jiang clenched his fist, and it began to glow. He slightly lowered his head towards it, and with a smile he thought that as the level increased, the strength also continued to increase. He had 127 stars, which meant that his individual combat power was already almost equivalent to that of a level 25 professional in the combat class. He began to turn his head back, and thought that now he only had to devour the corpses of the monsters and obtain devouring points. Seeing how powerful Jiang was, and feeling the power of the mother insect, the small spiders started fleeing from the area. They were intelligent monsters and were fully aware that they had no chance of winning against Jiang. He turned his head back, and upon seeing the little spiders fleeing, he thought there was no longer any threat. It didn't take him long to realize that these spiders had understood the situation and were therefore escaping. Despite wanting to kill these monsters to earn points, he decided not to do so, as the most important thing now was to start breeding insects. He began walking towards the corpses of the monsters, and little by little, Little Nine started manifesting through the poisonous mist. With a killer look, Jiang began to stare at the boss's corpse, clenched his fist tightly, extended the other one towards the sky, and told Little Nine that now it belonged to her. Upon hearing this, she thanked him and then returned to her natural form. She then opened her mouth, took a leap, and started moving towards the boss's corpse. She began to devour the corpse, and a system window appeared to grant him 600 devouring points. While Little Nine was enjoying her meal, Jiang turned his body to the side, and with a serious look, he thought that elite monsters like this boss were different from the others since they could provide a high devouring value. He didn't take long to come to the conclusion that hunting and quickly breeding the swarm of insects was a good way to become stronger and hunt more elite monsters. Several seconds later, another system window appeared in front of him to inform him that the devouring value was full. The system asked him if he wanted to start the insect breeding. Jiang began to look at the system window, and upon seeing how quickly the devouring value had filled up, he was amazed. He soon realized that elite monsters gave much more points than normal monsters. Several seconds later, Little Nine returned to her human form, knelt before him, placing one hand on her knee and the other on the ground. Then she bowed her head before him and informed him that Little Nine was already ready to reproduce. She asked him to allow her to continue following him with a much stronger power. While Jiang's body was emanating a powerful aura, He turned his head to the side and remained silent for several seconds, lost in his thoughts. He slightly turned his head towards her, and with a smile, he decided it was time to start breeding the insects. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform him that Little Nine had already started the first generation of mass insect breeding. Jiang's body and Little Nine's body began to emit a wave of energy, and the system informed him that the accelerated growth of talents and the blessing of the growth of all things were in effect. With a serious look, Jiang started to gaze at Little Nine, and thought to himself that his passive skills were more effective for accelerating the insect breeding. Several seconds later, the mark of Little Nine appeared on his hand. Upon seeing this, he didn't take long to realize that this was a new ability. His assumption was correct as a system window appeared to grant him 2 new exclusive abilities called Insect Nest and Dominion. Then, another system window appeared to inform him that the insect breeding had been accelerated, and there were 8 seconds remaining. Seeing this, Jiang thought that the insect breeding was almost complete. Jiang lifted his head towards the sky, and upon seeing what was in front of him, he was shocked. He couldn't help but be amazed and wonder if this was a colony of insects. In front of him stood Little Nine, with both hands extended to the sides and reproducing itself. In the blink of an eye, thousands of insects appeared and started flying around them. The system congratulated Jiang for successfully completing the breeding of the first swarm of insects. According to the system, there were a total of 2,300 insects. Jiang turned his head to one side, and while he was observing the insects, he started to smile and thought that the quantity was truly impressive. He couldn't believe that the first breeding cycle of the insects could reach over 2,000 offspring. This was only the first generation. He didn't know what would happen in the 3rd or 4th generation. One of the insects approached Jiang. Sensing its presence, he turned his body towards it and began to caress its head. He really liked these insects, however, their abilities and Little Nine's were different. He noticed that the insects had also acquired some new skills. The insect status window appeared. It was called Son of 9 Wings of Miasma. It had 4 abilities. The first one was Poisonous Mist that allowed it to corrode and devour everything it touched. The second one was Camouflage. This ability allowed it to camouflage itself using the reflection of its wings. The third one was Frenzy. When it used this ability, the devouring value was continuously consumed, in exchange temporarily increasing strength and speed. The fourth and final ability was called Self-Destruction. This ability allowed it to explode its body, releasing toxins and causing massive damage in the process. Jiang thought that the camouflage and self-destruction skills seemed quite useful. While he was lost in his thoughts, Little Nine approached him from behind and gave him a hug. She closed her eyes and with a smile, she caught his attention. Upon hearing her voice, Jiang snapped out of his trance, turned his head slightly towards her, and couldn't help but smile and feel at ease. He turned his body towards her, began to caress her head, and with a smile thought that she seemed to have changed but not much. Little Nine closed her eyes, placed her hands on her chest, and with a joyful smile informed him that she had finished the process of breeding the insects. Then, she took Jiang's arm with both hands and told him that she wanted to rest. Upon hearing this, he asked her what she meant by resting. At that moment, her body began to disappear. Jiang slightly turned his head towards his hand, and upon seeing this, he became somewhat confused. He started wondering where she had gone. And at that moment, a system window appeared to inform him that Little Nine had returned to the insect nest. Jiang started looking at his hand and couldn't help but smile and feel relieved. The system space was incredible. It was a space that could accommodate swarms of insects. Now it didn't matter how many swarms there were. They could all hide within the system, so Jiang would no longer be afraid of being discovered by anyone. The insect nest was a new ability that he had acquired. It was an ability that was granted at maximum level, which meant that it couldn't be leveled up. Jiang activated Little Nine's mark, started looking at his hand and saw that she was sleeping peacefully. He realized that after reproduction, insects needed to sleep. Jiang remembered that he had just acquired a new ability called Dominion, so he decided to test it out and see how it worked. He extended his hand to the side and activated the skill. As he did this, his body began to emit a powerful and suffocating energy, and his eyes started to shine. Once Jiang activated the ability, the insects that were by his side turned their heads towards him and started looking at him with a murderous gaze. Jiang turned his head towards them, and with a murderous look, he realized how this ability worked. He extended his hand towards the sky and it began to absorb the insects. This new ability allowed Jiang to control the swarm of insects. He turned his head towards his hand and thought that using this skill was as easy as moving an arm. While Jiang's eyes were shining, he started looking ahead and was amazed. By using this ability, he could also use the senses of the insects. Now Jiang could perceive the world in the same way insects did. As he looked around, he saw that this place was filled with monsters, hidden and ready to stalk their prey. Jiang turned his head to one side, and upon seeing the behavior of the insects, he couldn't help but smile. He realized that they were also excited. With a killer look, Jiang and the insects began to stare at the monsters. While his body was surrounded by little Nine's poisonous mist, he gave them the order to attack as it was time to test their new abilities. Upon hearing his command, thousands of insects destroyed a nearby building into pieces to attract the attention of all the monsters in the area. Their plan worked, as all the monsters near the area turned their heads towards where they were and slowly started approaching to see what was happening. Jiang decided not to wait any longer and go after the monsters. While his body was releasing little Nine's poisonous mist, he began to approach the monsters, who soon realized what was about to happen. They tried to escape, but it was already too late. Just before they could make a move, the poisonous mist started rapidly approaching them. In a matter of seconds, the poisonous mist stuck to the monsters and slowly began to corrode their bodies, causing them to feel immense pain. Not long after, all the monsters that had been affected by it lost their lives and fell to the ground. Now that they were dead, the poisonous mist slowly started devouring them. Jiang approached the corpses and began to stare at them intently. With the swarm of insects, there was almost no need for him to take action. Now, the reach of the poisonous mist was much larger and it devoured its targets faster and more extensively. Additionally, he now had shared vision with the ability called Dominion. Common monsters could no longer hide from the swarm of insects. Jiang turned his head to one side, and as he watched little Nine's poisonous mist slowly devouring the monster corpses, he started to smile and thought that soon he would be able to breed more insects. He remembered that he hadn't looked carefully at how much devouring value was needed for the next insect breeding. Thinking about this, he opened the system window. Upon seeing what had appeared on the system interface, Jiang was shocked and began to wonder what was happening and what this was. At the same time, a man arrived at an abandoned warehouse that was near where Jiang was and informed his leader that he had already returned. Upon seeing that he had come back, the leader asked him why he had taken so long and also gave him the order to quickly report on what was really happening in the spider's nest. This man was wearing a hood, had green hair, and was quite scared. He informed his leader that the spider's nest had been annihilated by someone mysterious and unknown, with a crushing annihilation that left not a single monster alive. His superior, who was a tall man with braids, couldn't believe what his ears had just heard. He turned his head towards his subordinate and with a surprised look asked if this was some kind of joke. He couldn't believe that someone had completely annihilated the spider's nest. Another man who was by their side approached them, and upon hearing this, he was shocked. The man with green hair approached them, and with a serious look, he replied that this was true, adding that the city of monsters was in ruins. Upon hearing this, their leader put his hand on his chin, began to look towards the ground. He was unable to believe that the nest had been razed to ashes. This was too terrifying to hear. Although at first he questioned if the culprit could be a member of the Night Watch, he later dismissed this idea as it was not the style of the Night Watch. He came to the conclusion that the responsible party must be some secret operation from a hidden family or a powerful assault group. He decided that it was best for them to retreat now. For them, this was a shame. They had been entrusted with the mission of filling a bottle with the venom of a wolf spider. Now that they had failed, he decided to make up for the losses on the way back by robbing some unfortunate ones. Upon hearing this, the man next to him turned his head towards him and couldn't help but sweat and panic. While they were talking, someone opened the door of the abandoned warehouse. Upon hearing the sound of the door opening, the three turned their heads back, and the man with green hair revealed to the other two that they had an unexpected visitor. Upon hearing this, they couldn't help but wonder who this person could be. A man put his hand on the door and as he slowly opened it, told them that he had finally found other professionals. Upon hearing this, the leader asked him who he was. This person was Jiang. He entered the warehouse, started walking towards them, dropped an arm, extended his hand towards them, and with a calm look asked them not to worry since he had only come here to level up. He also added that he had come to exchange some food with them. Upon hearing this, their leader felt relieved as Jiang had come alone. He turned his head towards him, started looking into his eyes, and with a smile agreed to exchange some food with him, adding that food in the desert wasn't cheap. After saying this, he asked Jiang what he wanted to exchange. The expression of the man next to him changed drastically. He adopted an offensive stance and began to stare at Jiang. Jiang approached the leader, started looking into his eyes, and with a smile asked him not to worry, adding that he had some very good items to exchange. Upon hearing this, the man's expression changed drastically once again. He began to look at Jiang and couldn't help but smile and feel curious about what he wanted to exchange. The leader ordered Jiang to show him what objects he had. At that moment, the two men surrounded Jiang and with a smile, they started unsheathing their swords. He simply turned his head slightly towards them and couldn't help but smile. From the beginning, he knew he couldn't trust them, so without thinking twice, he activated the ring and extended his hand towards them. In the blink of an eye, several spiders came out of the ring and with a piercing gaze they started looking at the men. Jiang turned his back on them and with a mocking voice asked if his products were good. Upon seeing the spiders, the men sheathed their swords again, took a few steps back, and went on high alert. The men began to look at the spiders and couldn't help but sweat and feel fear. They were aware that these were wolf spiders. They started to question if they had not been annihilated along with the spider nest. Thinking this, they began to wonder if Jiang was the person who had killed all the spiders. The current level of Jiang Chen was 17. He slightly turned his head towards them, started looking at them with an overwhelming gaze, and with a smile, he asked them not to think that he didn't know what they wanted to do. After saying this, Jiang sat on a rock, slightly turned his head towards them and calmly revealed that he was very angry now. So he advised them to grab their weapons and leave right away from here. Upon hearing this, the three men grabbed their belongings, turned their backs to Jiang, started running, and apologized for bothering him, adding that they were leaving right away. Several minutes later, once the men had fled from the warehouse, Jiang extended his hand to the side, releasing Little Nine's poisonous mist. He gave the order for the insects to come out. While Jiang was sitting on the rock, with one arm resting on his knee, he reached up and used the poisonous mist to release two insects. They began flying around him, with a murderous look in their eyes, searching for any hidden threat. Jiang began to drink a little bit of soup that the men had left. He was getting hungrier and thought he should have known better when he first obtained Little Nine. He didn't expect leading the swarm of insects to have such side effects. When drinking the soup, a system window appeared and Jiang's devouring value increased. Now he had 2768 points out of 1 million. The system advised him to increase the value as soon as possible. Originally, he had thought that the devouring value would increase faster after the insect swarm doubled, but he did not expect that the devouring value of the next reproduction would also double. This complicated things a lot for Jiang, since now the devouring value that a boss could provide was just a drop in the bucket. Even if he eliminated all the beast nests outside the city, it wouldn't be enough to fill up the devouring value for the next reproduction. Jiang started looking down at the ground and sank into his thoughts. He had heard that the beast nests and secret realms controlled by Nightwatch were not going to be made public, which meant that if he wanted to increase his swarm's devouring value, then he had to join the Nightwatch as soon as possible. He began to look at his hand and saw that Little Nine had not yet woken up. Upon seeing this, he quickly came to the conclusion that the burden of reproduction was not small. At that moment, Jiang started to feel someone's presence. Immediately, his expression changed drastically as he turned his head to one side and wondered what this person was doing here. He stood up, clenched his fist tightly, slightly turned his head to one side, and assumed an offensive stance. He could smell the scent of battle and how there were a lot of people chasing after her. He didn't know what was happening here and why she was being pursued. Several seconds later, a girl who was using an invisibility spell entered the warehouse, bumped into Jiang, and fell to the ground. She was the same girl as before. She supported herself with one hand on the floor and began touching her head with the other because it hurt. Jiang turned his head towards her and with a confused look, began to wonder why he had encountered her again. While the girl was lying on the ground, she placed one hand on the floor, put the other on her chest, lifted her head towards Jiang and immediately recognized him as the boy from the spider's nest. She started looking at him with a frightened gaze and asked him not to tell anyone that he had seen her here. Upon hearing this, Jiang couldn't help but be shocked. He turned his head towards her and couldn't help but look at her with a surprised expression. She had been so close to him and he hadn't even been able to sense her presence. It didn't take him long to come to the conclusion that the person the man with blue hair was chasing was her. He decided to take the girl somewhere safe, but at that moment he felt someone's presence. Quickly, he turned his head towards the warehouse entrance, and with a serious look, he thought it was already too late to leave. Several seconds later, several people entered the warehouse. Among them were Zheng Tai and the man with blue hair who was part of the Xiao family. They began to walk towards Jiang, and Zheng Tai didn't take long to recognize him. He couldn't help but feel fear and chills. He pointed at Jiang with his finger and informed his leader that he was the same guy they had encountered before. The man with blue hair put his hand in his pants pocket, started staring at Jiang, and with a smile praised his subordinate for having a good sense of smell. Jiang sat back down on the rock, rested his hands on his knees, and remained silent. Upon looking more closely, the man realized that this place was empty and Jiang was actually camping alone. With a gaze filled with anger, Zheng Tai began to look at Jiang and asked him if a girl had entered the warehouse a moment ago. He ordered him to respond immediately or else this time he was going to kill him. The man with blue hair started looking at Jiang, put his hand in front of Zheng Tai, and with a smile asked him to wait. He approached him, began to sit on the rock in front of Jiang. He knew that he was from the spiritual master class. He noticed that Jiang had leveled up very quickly. It had been less than a day since they last saw each other, and he was already level 16. The man became more and more interested in Jiang. He decided to set this topic aside and explained that he now had something urgent to do. While he was sitting on the rock, Jiang simply remained silent. He sat on the rock, rested an arm on his knee, drew his sword, began aiming at Jiang's neck, and with a serious look asked him if he had seen a girl with black hair around here. His subordinates approached, stood behind him, and remained silent. Jiang simply remained calm, started looking into the man's eyes and quickly concluded that based on the aura emanating from his body, his level was very high, surpassing level 30. Seeing that he could accurately detect his class and level, he thought this man must have some detection equipment with him. Jiang turned his head to the side, began pointing towards the back door of the warehouse with his finger, and explained to the man that he had just seen someone's shadow going in that direction. He also added that because he wasn't of the perceptive class, he wasn't sure if that was the person they were looking for. Upon hearing this, the man started to stand up and tentatively decided to believe him. He also advised Jiang to be more honest. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head towards him and was somewhat surprised. He stood up, turned his back to Jiang, slightly turned his head towards him, began to look into his eyes, and with a murderous gaze warned him that if he found out that he had helped that girl, then the Xiao family wouldn't let him go. Upon hearing this, Zheng Tai also turned his head slightly towards him and couldn't help but smile. Several seconds later, the man and his subordinates began to leave the warehouse. Jiang turned his body towards them, and as he watched them gradually move away, he remembered that the Xiao family was the most powerful family in Zhengguo. With a penetrating gaze, he started to look at the man with blue hair and thought that the clans in the city had a long history and all of them were feudal officials. They were also extremely mysterious and rarely entered the world unless a great disaster occurred. Some powerful men in the family could even split the heavens and the earth. This guy was more powerful than Jiang had thought. For him, it wasn't good to be remembered by someone like that. Several seconds later, Jiang slightly turned his head towards the warehouse exit, and seeing that the men had already left, he decided to leave as well since it wasn't good for him to stay in this place. The girl came out of her hiding place, approached Jiang, put her hands on her hips, and thanked him for saving her. Jiang stood up, turned his body towards her, and remained silent. He quickly grabbed her arm, and upon seeing this, the girl panicked and started wondering what he had planned to do. Jiang approached her, started looking into her eyes with an aggressive gaze, and told her that she almost fooled him like last time. Since he had helped her again this time, he asked how she had gotten in trouble with these people. With Jiang so close to her, she couldn't help but blush. She began looking at him and explained that her family had a huge debt. The guy planned to take away the things they were escorting and kill them all, but he didn't expect her to escape. He was afraid that the news would leak out, so he was chasing after her for this reason. After explaining this, she asked Jiang if he wanted to silence her. Upon hearing this, Jiang let go of her hand, turned his back on her, and began to walk away from her. Upon seeing this, she placed a hand on her chest, extended the other towards him, and told him that she would always remember that he had helped her and that she would also be very grateful to him in the future. While he was distancing himself from her, he closed his eyes, clenched his fists tightly, and told her that he didn't want to get involved in her affairs. At that moment, Jiang abruptly stopped, opened his eyes, and thought that something was not right. The girl also noticed this, and her expression changed drastically. With a fearful look, she revealed to him that someone had just placed a barrier spell around the warehouse. At that moment, someone who was outside the warehouse gave the order to their subordinates to come out. Jiang started looking towards the entrance of the warehouse and thought that now it was impossible to escape. He knew that even if the girl said she didn't know him, they wouldn't believe her anymore. He activated his insect perception and began walking around the area, realizing they were surrounded on all sides. With a serious look, Jiang began to stare towards the entrance of the warehouse, ready to face any opponent. On the other side, the girl got scared and placed her hand on her chest. Several seconds later, the man with blue hair and his subordinates appeared. Their bodies started emanating a killer aura. With a penetrating gaze, they began to look at Jiang, ready to finish him off. He knew that Jiang had lied to him. He approached him, stared into his eyes, and ordered him to hand over the girl. He called Jiang a bastard and told him that he knew he had lied to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to catch the girl. With a serious look, Jiang simply started looking at him and remained silent. Upon seeing the man with blue hair, the girl's expression changed drastically. She began to look at him and couldn't help but panic and be terrified at the same time. She explained to Jiang that he had already taken everything that the Luo family owned. After saying this, she asked the man why he wanted to kill her so badly. He started looking at the girl and calmly asked if he really needed a reason. Upon hearing that she belonged to the Luo family, Jiang turned his head towards her and began to stare at her intently with a serious look. Jiang and the girl were on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, while the man with blue hair and his subordinates were on the first floor. She clenched her fist with one hand, extended the other to the side, started staring at the man and told him that if he killed her, then the Luo family would never forgive him. She also added that they would never let him live in peace. Jiang, who was standing behind her, simply dropped his arms to his sides and just kept watching the man. Upon hearing this, the man with blue hair couldn't help but burst into laughter. He asked her if she truly believed that a family like the Luo family was capable of doing this. At that moment, his subordinates began to look at the girl and couldn't help but smile. While he had one hand on his waist, he lowered his head, put the other hand over his face, and couldn't help but laugh at the thought that a second-rate family with a little money really took themselves seriously. He revealed to the girl that without the protection of the Xiao family ancestors 100 years ago, the Luo family would have been annihilated long ago. Upon hearing this, one of his subordinates unsheathed his sword and the others started laughing. Zheng Tai crossed his arms, stared at Jiang intently, and couldn't help but smile. After saying this, he removed his hand from his face, lifted his head, and with a serious look, he told her that in the eyes of the Xiao family, they were no different from humble peasants. He also added that for him, they were just cattle that the Xiao family could slaughter. Upon hearing this, Jiang turned his head towards him and with a look filled with hatred, began to stare at him intently. He couldn't help but become enraged. He couldn't believe that a person could be so arrogant. The man extended his hand forward and his palm started emitting a powerful red energy which began to rise towards the sky. Then, he looked at the girl and with a smile asked her what could the Xiao family investigate if there was nothing to find. Several seconds later, the energy he had released began to create a powerful barrier around the abandoned warehouse. This ability was called the Dragon Prison Formation of the Xiao family. The girl looked up at the sky, placed a hand on her chest, clenched her fist, and couldn't help but be astonished and panic as she now didn't know how she was going to escape from here. Jiang lifted his head and upon seeing the barrier, he couldn't help but be amazed. To him, the man with blue hair was someone very interesting. While Jiang and the girl were standing on the second floor of the abandoned warehouse, Zheng Tai unsheathed his sword, started staring at the girl, and prepared to attack. He asked the others to listen carefully to the young master and not leave anyone alive. The others responded with an understood. The man with blue hair, who was standing next to Zheng Tai, simply remained silent. Several seconds later, Zheng Tai prepared to attack, but at that moment, the man with blue hair stood in front of him and put his hand up to indicate for him to stop. Then, he began staring at Jiang and with a smile told him that the girl from the Luo family must die today. He remained interested in Jiang as he was fully aware that he possessed the divine rank creation class. After saying this, while he was still looking at Jiang, he explained to Zheng Tai that the creation class called Spiritual Master was a very rare profession. He wasn't like other people who didn't know what it was. Then, he reached out his hand to the side and with a smile decided to give Jiang the opportunity to obtain everything under the sky today. He extended his hand towards Jiang and gave him the order to capture the girl, in exchange for sparing his life so that he could serve the Xiao family. After saying this, he asked Jiang what he thought. Upon hearing this, the girl who had her hands on her waist couldn't help but be shocked. On the other hand, Jiang dropped his arms to his sides and remained silent for several seconds. Jiang began to look down at the ground and couldn't help but smile and praise him, as the bastards of the Xiao family were really good at making suggestions. The girl turned her head towards him and upon seeing this, she couldn't help but panic, wondering if Jiang was really going to accept his proposal. With a murderous look, Jiang stared at the man with blue hair and rejected his offer, mocking him by telling him that the Xiao family could go to hell. After saying this, he tightly clenched his fists, and while his body was releasing the poisonous mist of Little Nine, with a serious look he told him that he refused. He also asked him if he could come for him if he was looking for a fight. The girl turned her body towards Jiang, brought her hands close to her chest, and upon seeing that his body was surrounded by the poisonous mist, she couldn't help but take a few steps back and become terrified. She began to wonder what was happening. Upon hearing that Jiang had rejected his proposal, the man with blue hair couldn't help but become enraged, as this was a dishonor to him. He gave the order to his subordinates to finish him off. Upon hearing the order, they unsheathed their swords, gained momentum, took a big leap, and began advancing quickly towards Jiang. While in midair, Zheng Tai started looking at him and asked the others to be careful, as Jiang wasn't easy. While little by little they were getting closer, Jiang simply stayed silently observing them without making any movement. Several seconds later, they approached the second floor, and Zheng Tai, upon seeing that Jiang's body was surrounded by poisonous mist, revealed to the others that he could use poison and advised them not to attack directly. Upon seeing that they were ready to attack, the girl hid behind Jiang. At that moment, Jiang deactivated the poisonous mist, extended his hand towards them, and while his body was surrounded by a green energy, he began to stare at Zheng Tai with a serious look and revealed to him that not only could he use poison but also the talent ability of his. Upon seeing this, the girl took several steps back, placed her hand on her chest, turned her head towards Jiang, and couldn't help but feel somewhat confused, as she didn't know what this power was. In the blink of an eye, several green spiritual roots began to emerge from the ground. Zheng Tai approached Jiang, grabbed the sword with both hands, and prepared to attack. But at that moment, he looked down at the ground, and upon seeing the spiritual roots, he was shocked and couldn't help but wonder what this ability was. The spiritual roots grew enormous, and in an instant, they entangled around Zheng Tai's and the others' bodies, rendering them immobile. They panicked as they didn't know what was happening. Jiang, who had his hand extended towards them, revealed that his ability was the evolution of all things. Little by little, the spiritual roots began to tighten Zheng Tai's body. He quickly grabbed the roots with his hands and started looking at Jiang, unable to help but wonder what was happening. Seeing how strong the roots were, he realized that his class was of divine rank. He was also confused because he remembered that Jiang could use poison as well. He decided not to stand idly by, unsheathed his sword, held it with both hands, and used all his strength to cut the roots around his body into pieces. Upon seeing this, the others also began doing the same as him. He advised them to attack the roots since they were very fragile. The spiritual roots began to fall to the ground near the man with blue hair, who started to push them away using his hands. He didn't take long to realize what was happening. With a surprised look, he shouted and called Zheng Tai an idiot, explaining that this was just a distraction. He also added that Jiang was ready to attack. Jiang took advantage of Zheng Tai and the others being distracted to release the insects, which began to look at them with a penetrating gaze. While his body was surrounded by poisonous mist, he reached out his hand to the side, stared at him intently, and explained that it was already too late. The girl sat on the floor, resting her hand on it, lifted her head, and upon seeing the insects, she was surprised. While Zheng Tai's subordinates were busy cutting the roots, the insects began to approach them. He turned his head to one side, and upon seeing the insects, his expression changed drastically. He couldn't help but sweat and be shocked, wondering what these things were. The insects began to move at a high speed and started attacking them. Zheng Tai blocked the attack using his sword, but unfortunately for him, the insects were so strong that in a matter of seconds, they destroyed his sword. Upon seeing this, he was in shock, unable to believe that Jiang had actually destroyed his weapon. Upon closer inspection, he realized that it wasn't poisonous mist at all, but rather summoned monsters. At that moment, an insect began to approach him from behind and it prepared to attack. He lifted his head, and upon seeing this, he was surprised. He started screaming and revealed to the others that this poisonous mist actually came from the monsters. He came to the conclusion that he couldn't dodge the attack. Jiang, who had his hand extended towards him and was controlling the insect, began to look at him with a murderous gaze, and couldn't help but smile as he had finally caught him. Just before the insect could attack Zheng Tai, someone approached him and put their foot on his shoulder, called him trash, and asked him get lost. He turned his head to the side, and upon seeing this, he became somewhat confused. Upon seeing this, Jiang also became somewhat confused and amazed at the same time. This person was none other than the man with blue hair. He unsheathed his sword, grabbed it with one hand, gained momentum, took a big leap, and as he slowly advanced towards Jiang, he used the first form of Kongning's 9 forms. By doing this, his body began to emit an orange aura. While Jiang's body was surrounded by little Nine's poisonous mist, he simply remained silent. The girl who was sitting on the ground next to him put her hand in front of her mouth and became terrified. Jiang lifted his head towards him, and upon seeing that he was faster than the poisonous mist, he couldn't help but clench his teeth tightly and sweat. He used the secret technique of the Xiao family called chasing dragons. At that moment, a dragon made of spiritual energy manifested itself and began to stare at Jiang. It clenched its teeth tightly and attacked him. Its attack was so powerful that it destroyed the area where Jiang was into pieces and created a smoke screen in the process. While with one hand he was holding the sword and had it extended towards Jiang, he began to stare at him fixedly and with a smile called him a bastard. He knew it was going to be difficult to deal with him, but luckily his level wasn't very high and his speed wasn't fast enough. He thought that by using this blade alone he would be able to defeat him. But to his surprise, several seconds later, once the smoke cleared, his expression changed drastically. He was in shock as he couldn't believe what his eyes were seeing. Luckily, Jiang was still alive, thanks to the girl using her hidden profession ability called Earth Eternal Shield and creating a shield around them. While she had her hands extended towards the shield, it began to crack. She closed her eyes and while blood was coming out of her mouth, she explained to Jiang that she was in a lot of pain. Jiang, who was standing behind her, began to look at her with a surprised and dumbfounded expression. He realized that she was actually a defensive type. The man with blue hair had forgotten about her, but now seeing that she had blocked his attack using the shield, he couldn't help but become enraged. He started looking at her aggressively, clenched his teeth tightly, and prepared to attack again. Jiang began to look at him and thought that this was a good opportunity to attack. He extended his hand to one side, releasing the poisonous mist. Several seconds later, he landed on the ground. At that moment, several insects began to approach him quickly from behind. One of his subordinates, who was lying on the ground, reached out towards him and caught his attention to ask him to be careful. While holding the sword with one hand, he turned his head back and upon seeing the insects approaching quickly, he became alert. At that moment, he grabbed one of his subordinates by the hood. Upon seeing this, the subordinate became somewhat confused as he didn't know what was happening. While with one hand he was holding the sword, with the other he grabbed his subordinate by the hood and placed him in front of himself to use him as a shield. Since the insects were not very smart, they attacked his subordinate instead of him. The insect's attack was so powerful that their bodies were thrown backwards. His subordinate was seriously injured. While his body lay beside him, he placed a knee on the ground, leaned the sword against the ground, rested his arm on the other knee, and began to look down at the ground and cough. Jiang came down from the second floor, started approaching him and couldn't help but think that he was a nasty bastard for using one of his own men to block the attack. The insect's attack pierced the man's chest who was lying on the ground. Even though he was badly injured and bleeding from his mouth, he was still alive. He began to cough and caught his master's attention. He stood up, started approaching Jiang, slightly turned his head towards his subordinate, and thanked him for enduring the attack for him. He thought that he had not educated him in vain, and upon seeing that he was still alive, he couldn't help but praise him and think that he was truly strong. Jiang, who was standing in front of him, simply remained silent. He took out a dragon yuan pill from his pocket with his hand, opened his mouth and ate it. He couldn't believe that he was being forced to use the dragon yuan pill. In a matter of seconds, his subordinate lost his life. He began to approach Jiang, dragging the sword on the ground, causing small rocks to slowly float. Upon seeing this, Jiang assumed an offensive stance, while on the other side, the girl sitting next to him and covering the wound on her arm with her hand remained still. He tightly gripped the sword, pointing it towards Jiang, and with a murderous look, he warned that his next attack would slice his head into pieces. Jiang simply remained calm, calmly looking at the man in silence, ready to face any attack. Once the dragon yuan pill took effect, the elemental energy dragon grew enormous and appeared behind him. Its eyes began to shine, indicating to him that it was ready to attack. He assumed an offensive stance, stomped forcefully on the ground, breaking it into pieces. Then he tightly gripped his sword and stared fiercely at Jiang, determined this time to finish him off. His energy was so strong that the rocks around him began to float. Jiang started looking at the dragon and couldn't help but be terrified. He didn't know if he would be able to withstand the attack. The man with blue hair began unsheathing his sword and prepared to attack. This time he decided to use technique number 2 of the 9 Kongning styles. At that moment, he used the ability called the Descending Dragon's Cut and launched a powerful attack towards Jiang. In doing so, his body began to emit a powerful energy, and in the blink of an eye, the elemental energy dragon started advancing quickly towards him. It opened its mouth and prepared to finish him off. At that moment, the girl stood in front of Jiang. She extended her hands towards the attack and with a determined look, used the Earth Eternal Shield once again. Jiang put his elbow in front of his face, turned his head towards her, and upon seeing that despite being injured she was willing to block another attack, he couldn't help but be somewhat surprised. In an instant, a green shield appeared around them. Upon seeing this, the spiritual dragon began to attack the shield, breaking part of the ground and creating a curtain of smoke in the process. While she had her hands extended towards the shield and was blocking the attack, she closed her eyes, clenched her teeth tightly, and explained to Jiang that because the man had taken Xiao family's secret dragon Yuan pill, now the strength of the dragon had multiplied several times. Now her shield would not be able to withstand the attack at all, which meant they were doomed. In a matter of seconds, little by little the shield began to crack. Upon seeing this, she decided to use her last bit of strength to hold on as long as possible. Jiang grabbed his cloak with his finger, started looking at the spiritual dragon and couldn't help but be amazed and think that the man with blue hair was really strong since each strike from the dragon was a deadly move. The previous attack had already been astonishing, so he didn't expect him to unleash such power. The man with blue hair jumped, approached them, and began to stare at Jiang. When he saw that the shield was starting to crack, he couldn't help but smile. He used the descending dragon's cut several times, launching powerful slashes towards the shield. Jiang returned his gaze and reached out his hand towards the sky, activating the swarm of insects mark. Seeing that he was a ruthless and powerful person, he decided not to show any mercy. Several seconds later, once the girl's shield broke, several thousand insects began to emerge from Jiang's hand and appeared in the sky. The man with blue hair looked up and upon seeing so many insects, he couldn't help but be shocked. He clenched his teeth tightly and started wondering what was happening. While thousands of insects were coming out of Jiang's hand, he began to stare at the man with blue hair and asked him to get ready. The girl who was sitting on the floor behind him put a hand on her shoulder where she had the wound, started looking at Jiang with a surprised look and began to wonder if he really belonged to the creation class. Several insects appeared around Jiang and began to look at the man with blue hair, ready to attack. Jiang started approaching him and gave the order for the insects to attack. Upon hearing this, he clenched his teeth tightly and couldn't help but panic. He knew that if so many insects attacked him at once, he wouldn't have any chance of winning. Upon hearing Jiang's order, the insects began to advance towards him and prepared to attack. Seeing the number of insects, he unsheathed his sword and assumed a defensive stance. With a serious look on his face, he started staring intently at Jiang and used the descending dragon cut. By doing this, his sword emitted a powerful energy. He was not willing to give up as they were just some smelly insects. With little effort, he started cutting the insects into pieces, while Jiang's body was releasing the poisonous mist from Little Nine. With a penetrating look, he reached out his hand towards him and asked if he truly believed this. The bodies of the injured insects began to regenerate. Seeing that the insects could regenerate, he couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how this was possible. Several seconds later, they started advancing towards him and began attacking again. He began to defend himself from the attack using his sword, in the process cutting the bodies of several insects in half, which quickly started to regenerate again. Upon seeing this, he couldn't help but panic as he couldn't believe that he truly couldn't kill them. While the insects were emerging from Jiang's body, with a serious look on his face, he began to stare at him intently and decided to see how long he could endure. The girl who was behind him turned her head towards him and with a surprised look, she couldn't help but be shocked and wonder how powerful he was. Upon hearing Jiang's mockery, he became furious, swinging the sword forcefully and using once again the skill descending dragon cut, cutting the body of an insect that was in front of him in half. The spiritual dragon manifested again, opened its mouth, and began devouring the insects. He had used this attack because the dragon could continue devouring the insects without allowing them to regenerate. While he had his guard down, one of the insects approached him from behind and gave him a strong bite on the arm, poisoning him and causing him to drop his sword in the process. Upon feeling the bite, he turned his head to the side and upon seeing the insect, clenched his teeth tightly and thought that this was not good at all. Now that his right hand was poisoned, he couldn't use the sword. Now that he had no other choice, he put his hand into his clothes and pulled out a red object. The insects took advantage of this opportunity and began to approach him quickly, but he took the object out of his clothes, raised it to the sky, and used the technique called Jade Protection of Life. At that moment, a powerful red energy started to appear around his body. He mocked Jiang by asking if he believed he could kill the great Xiao Yuanwu with a few insignificant insects. Jiang simply stood there silently observing him without saying a word. He reached out his hand towards Yuanwu, began to stare at him intently with a serious look and asked him what kind of treasure this was and how it had such power. After saying this, he ordered the insects to devour him. The object had created a shield around Yuanwu's body. The insects followed Jiang's order and started attacking the shield, but no matter how hard they tried, it was in vain. Seeing this, he quickly realized that the attack hadn't even made a scratch on the shield. while Yuanwu was covering the wound from the insect bite on his arm with his hand. He turned his head towards Jiang and advised him not to waste his energy since it was the inherited treasure of the Xiao family called Jade Treasure, which had divine powers. Jiang refused and ordered the insects to attack again. Yuanwu stared at him and explained that once the Jade Treasure was activated, the shield could block all external attacks. With this shield, Jiang would not be able to harm him anymore. Jiang simply remained silent. While the insects continued to attack the shield, Yuanwu began to approach them. Upon seeing that he was able to control the insects and bring him to the point of using the ancestral treasure, he couldn't help but praise him for being amazing. He also added that even if Jiang used all his cards up his sleeve, he wouldn't be able to harm him. Seeing the man approaching, the girl stood up and grabbed Jiang by his clothes. Within seconds, he started bleeding from his mouth and approached Jiang. With a smile, he decided to make him an offer one last time. As long as Jiang was willing to follow and obey him, he could allow him to join the Xiao family and grant him the Xiao surname, something many dreamed of achieving. After saying this, he asked Jiang to think it over carefully and not miss out on this opportunity. Jiang began to look at him with a calm gaze and remained silent, thinking for several seconds. He started to stare fixedly at Yuanwu and couldn't help but get angry when he saw that he had become accustomed to being conceited, to the point where he couldn't even see the situation he was in. Upon hearing this, the girl turned her head towards him and with a confused look, began to wonder what Jiang was up to. He approached Jiang, extended his hand to the side, and with a smile asked him to stop bragging. It didn't matter to him if Jiang accepted or not because even if he couldn't kill him today, he could do it any other day. With the influence of the Xiao family throughout the country, he wouldn't be able to hide or confront them. Jiang began to stare at Yuanwu intently and with a smile, he reminded him of his own words that one couldn't investigate if there was nothing to find. After saying this, he asked him what could happen if he died without leaving any trace. At that moment, a giant tentacle struck the ground. Upon hearing this sound, Yuanwu slightly turned his head back and with a gaze filled with terror, he started wondering what was happening. This tentacle belonged to the insect mother. She emerged from the swarm of insects and appeared behind them. Upon seeing how enormous she was, the girl fell to the ground. Yuanwu looked up and upon seeing how huge and terrifying she was, he started sweating. At that moment, Jiang gave her the order to devour him. Upon hearing his command, Little Nine began to approach Yuanwu and thank Jiang as she was very hungry. Upon hearing this, Yuanwu's expression changed drastically. He started feeling a fear that he had never felt before in his life. Little Nine began to smile and using her tentacle, she attacked Yuanwu's shield. Due to her enormous strength, his body was sent flying and crashed into the wall, breaking it into pieces. He started screaming in agony, unable to believe that a monster like Little Nine actually existed. He asked Jiang what kind of monster she was. With a calm look, Jiang explained to him that Little Nine had just finished reproducing herself, so he and the jade were exactly what she needed to satisfy her hunger. Little Nine began to repeatedly hit Yuanwu using her tentacle, creating a large curtain of smoke in the process. In a matter of seconds, the shield started breaking into pieces. He opened his mouth and started screaming in pain, questioning why the shield had broken so easily. He began to bleed from his mouth and fell to the ground. He couldn't believe that this was happening. Now the fate of the Xiao family and the jade were going to disappear. Now that the shield had been broken, Little Nine started to stare at him intently. She began to bring her tentacle closer to him and decided to deliver the final blow. With a cold expression, Jiang remained silently observing this. Little Nine attacked Yuanwu, destroying the ground into pieces in the process. Her attack had been so powerful that all that was left of Yuanwu was a pool of blood. She began to lift the tentacle from the ground, and Jiang thought that no one should find out about this since Yuanwu was now dead. He started walking, reached his hand towards the sky, activated the swarm mark, and gave Little Nine the order to transform. Several seconds later, Little Nine transformed, returned to human form, and hugged him. Then, she closed her eyes and with a smile explained that Yuanwu was delicious. She thanked him and also added that she was the one who loved him the most. The girl who was sitting on the floor turned her head to the side and upon seeing Little Nine, she couldn't help but feel somewhat confused and scared. Jiang turned his back on her, started to walk away, and decided to take a look at the Xiao family. At that moment, he turned his head towards her and decided to take care of her. The girl who was sitting on the floor panicked and couldn't help but sweat. She remembered that she now knew his secret, and thinking about this, she couldn't help but wonder if he was going to kill her to keep her silent. Jiang began to stare at the girl with a serious look and started wondering what he should do with her. At that moment, his body started emitting Little Nine's poisonous mist, and several insects appeared behind him, staring at the girl, ready to attack. He approached her, started looking at the ground and asked her to give him a good reason not to kill her. Upon seeing this, she panicked, quickly knelt before him, took out some gold coins, bowed her head before him and explained that this was all the money she had on her. It was worth millions, practically her life. She was willing to give it to him in exchange for sparing her life. Jiang picked up a gold coin with his hand, started looking at the girl and thought that she had some sincerity. But since she knew too much and also lied, he decided that it was best to eliminate her. She stood up, closed her eyes, raised one hand towards the sky, and swore by her name Luo Sandow that if she lied to him, then the heavens could punish her with 5 thunders. Jiang was somewhat confused as he didn't know whether to believe that her name was Luo Sandow, since she always told lies without thinking about the consequences. Luo Sandow approached him, handed him her identification card, and looked at him with a sincere gaze. She explained to him that what she was saying was true. She didn't know what her parents were thinking when they gave her this name, but she really wasn't deceiving him. She also added that if he still didn't believe her, then he could look at her identification card. Jiang took her identification card, brought it closer, and upon looking more closely, he saw a chubby girl. Upon seeing this, he asked Luo Sandow if she was sure that she was the same person as in the photo. She grabbed strands of her hair, started pretending to have 2 ponytails, closed her eyes, puffed up her cheeks and explained that the photo had been taken 2 years ago when she hadn't grown yet and hadn't lost weight. Upon seeing the expression on her face, Jiang turned his head back and started laughing out loud. Upon witnessing this, the insects flying behind him became somewhat confused. Then, he turned his head towards her and with an intense gaze, explained to her that he still couldn't trust her and didn't know if she would be able to keep the secret since, after all, this was something only the dead could do. Just before he could finish his sentence, she jumped, used the storage ring causing a portal to appear. While she had one hand in the portal, with the other she took out a scroll, and started approaching Jiang. With a serious look, she asked him not to worry about this. Jiang began to look at the scroll with a surprised expression and asked her what it was. She began to open the scroll using both hands, and she explained to him that this was a sealing scroll. Once she revealed the secret, she would be executed immediately. She was very afraid of dying, and for this reason, she had taken out the scroll. At that moment, a system window appeared to inform Jiang that she swore to protect his secret with her own life. If she revealed this secret, then she would be executed. Upon seeing this, he was somewhat surprised as he couldn't believe that something like this existed in the world. Several seconds later, he picked up the scroll with his hand, closed one eye, started looking at it with the other, and decided to accept. Now that she had signed the confidentiality agreement, he decided not to kill her for now. Upon hearing this, she thanked him. He turned his head towards her and asked how much this scroll cost. She put her finger on her cheek, started looking at him and revealed that its approximate value was around 10 million. Jiang tightly gripped the scroll, began to approach her, and with a furious look, he thought that this meant she had just used the only valuable thing she had in the storage